They say courage isn't the absence of fear, it's standing up when everyone else sits down. In 1885 New Mexico, a woman stood alone outside Hanson's diner, refused service simply for traveling without a man. The desert sun beat down mercilessly as townspeople whispered and pointed. Then a cowboy dismounted his horse, walked straight to her side, and did something that would change both their lives forever. This is the story of Evelyn Hart and Luke Barrett, where one act of kindness sparked a wildfire of change. Stay with me until the end and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The afternoon sun hung like a copper coin in the New Mexico sky, baking the dusty main street of Redemption Springs until the wooden boardwalks creaked with heat. Evelyn Hart stood motionless outside Hanson's diner, her traveling dress dark with perspiration, her gloved hands trembling slightly as they gripped the handle of her worn leather satchel. Inside the diner's windows, she could see families eating, the clink of silverware on china, the comfortable murmur of conversation. But for her, the door might as well have been made of iron. 20 minutes earlier, she'd walked through that same door with her head held high despite 3 days of stagecoach travel, despite the dust in her hair and the exhaustion in her bones. She'd approached the counter with what remained of her dignity and asked simply for a meal and a cup of coffee. Gordon Hanson, the diner's owner, a thick-necked man with suspicious eyes, had looked her up and down with unconcealed disapproval. "We don't serve unescorted women here," he'd said flatly, loud enough for every patron to hear. "Respectable establishments don't." "I'm a paying customer," Evelyn had replied, keeping her voice steady. "I've traveled from Boston, I'm hungry, and I can pay." "Policy is policy," Hanson had crossed his arms. A woman traveling alone, staying in hotels, eating in public places without a husband or family. He'd let the implication hang in the air like smoke. "That ain't respectable. And this here's a respectable place." The conversation in the diner had stopped. Every eye had turned to watch. Some faces showed sympathy, but more showed agreement with Hanson's assessment. This was 1885, and the West might be wild, but its social codes were carved in granite. "I'm not what you're suggesting," Evelyn had said quietly. "I'm here to claim my father's property, David Hart's daughter. Perhaps you knew him." Recognition had flickered across Hanson's face, but it hadn't softened his expression. "Knew him to see him. Heard he passed. That's unfortunate. But it don't change the rules. Good day, miss." When she hadn't moved, he'd raised his voice. "I said good day." Now she stood outside, the public nature of her humiliation complete. The stage had already departed, taking her trunk to the boarding house she'd arranged by letter. Her money was running low. Her father's property was 5 miles outside town, and she had no horse, no wagon, no means of getting there before nightfall. More than that, she had no allies. The town of Redemption Springs bustled around her with studied indifference. Women crossed the street rather than walk past her. Men tipped their hats but didn't stop. A group of rough-looking cowboys on the saloon porch across the street made comments she pretended not to hear, followed by harsh laughter. Evelyn had known coming west would be hard. After her father's death 6 months ago, she'd discovered he'd left her a ranch. Small, he'd written in his final letter, but with good water and better bones. "You were always the strong one," he'd written. "Your sister got your mother's gentle heart, but you got my fighting spirit. This land needs that spirit, Evie girl. Come claim it. Make it yours." So she'd left Boston, left her teaching position, left her sister's comfortable home and the marriage proposal from Charles Whitmore, the banker's son who'd courted her with appropriate restraint for 2 years. She'd packed her father's letters, her teaching certificates, her mother's silver locket, and a copy of Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl that had shaped her views on justice. She'd boarded a train, then a stagecoach, traveling toward a future she could barely imagine. She hadn't expected the future to begin with such pointed rejection. "You planning to stand there all day?" a woman's voice called from a passing wagon. The speaker was perhaps 40, dressed in simple homespun, with a face weathered by sun and hardship. "Best move along before you give folks more to talk about than they already got." "I need food," Evelyn said, hating how her voice cracked slightly. "I need to get to my father's property." The woman's expression softened briefly, but she shook her head. "Can't help you? I'm sorry. Got troubles enough of my own without adding to them." She snapped the reins, and her wagon rolled on. Evelyn closed her eyes against the sting of tears she refused to let fall. She'd cried when her father died, cried at his memorial service in Boston, where so few had come because David Hart had been just another man who'd gone west and never returned. She'd cried reading his letters that spoke of loneliness and hard work and dreams of bringing his daughters to see the life he'd built. She would not cry now, not in public, not where these people could see her break. "Mighty hot to be standing out here, ma'am." The voice was low and calm, with an accent that spoke of Texas or perhaps Oklahoma. Evelyn opened her eyes to find a man standing a few feet away, holding the reins of a buckskin horse. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with shoulders broadened by hard work and a frame that suggested strength without bulk. His face was shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but she could see a strong jaw, a few days' worth of stubble, and eyes that looked at her with something she hadn't seen since arriving in Redemption Springs: simple human kindness. "I've been hotter," she said, though it wasn't true. The sun felt like it was pressing down on her skull. He glanced at the diner, then back at her, and understanding crossed his features. "Hanson give you trouble?" "Mr. Hanson has policies," Evelyn said carefully. "I apparently don't meet the criteria for service." Something flickered in the man's eyes. Anger, she thought, but controlled. He tied his horse to the hitching post with economical movements, then turned and walked straight to the diner door. He held it open and looked back at her. "Coming, ma'am?" "He won't serve me," Evelyn said. I told you. He'll serve you if you're with me." The cowboy's voice was still calm, but there was iron underneath now. "I'm a regular customer. Been eating here twice a week for 3 years. Hanson knows my money's good, and he knows I don't tolerate foolishness. Now you look like you're about to fall over from heat and hunger, so let's go inside and remedy that." Evelyn stared at him. A complete stranger, offering not just help but public alliance. In Boston, such a gesture from an unknown man would have been scandalous. But this wasn't Boston, and she was past the point of choosing pride over survival. She walked through the door he held open, her head high despite everything. The diner fell silent again. Gordon Hanson looked up from behind his counter, his face reddening when he saw who'd entered. "Barrett, I already told this woman." "You told her you don't serve unescorted women," the cowboy, Barrett, interrupted smoothly. He removed his hat, revealing dark hair and a face that was more interesting than handsome, with lines around the eyes that suggested he smiled often and meant it. "Lucky thing she's not unescorted anymore." He pulled out a chair at the nearest table and looked at Evelyn expectantly. She sat, her heart pounding, feeling every eye in the place fixed on her. Barrett sat across from her, placed his hat on the empty chair beside him, and met Hanson's glare with absolute calm. "We'll have today's special, whatever that is. And coffee. Lots of coffee. Miss—" He raised an eyebrow at Evelyn. "Hart," she said quietly. "Evelyn Hart." "Miss Hart will have the same," Barrett continued, as if there had never been any question. "And if she wants pie after, she'll have that too." The silence stretched out. Hanson's jaw worked, his hands gripping the counter edge. But Barrett simply waited, his posture relaxed, his expression pleasant. The message was clear. This wasn't up for discussion. Finally, Hanson jerked his head in a nod and retreated to the kitchen. The low hum of conversation resumed around them, though Evelyn could feel the weight of continuing attention. "I'm Luke Barrett," the cowboy said, extending his hand across the table. "Welcome to Redemption Springs, Miss Hart. Though I'll admit, the town's making a poor first impression." Evelyn shook his hand. His grip was warm, calloused, and brief. "Thank you, Mr. Barrett. You didn't have to—" "Seemed like I did," he said simply. "Hanson's a decent cook, but a small-minded man. Gets ideas in his head about how things should be, and he can't see past them." He leaned back as a waitress, a young girl of perhaps 16 with frightened eyes, brought 2 cups of coffee. "Thanks, Emma." The girl nodded and scurried away. Luke pushed 1 cup toward Evelyn. "Drink. You look like you've been traveling hard." She wanted to protest that she was fine, that she didn't need charity, that she could handle her own problems, but the coffee was hot and strong, and after 3 days of bad water and weak tea, it tasted like salvation. She drank half the cup before setting it down. "I have," she admitted. From Boston. 3 days by stage from Santa Fe. Luke whistled low. That's a hard journey for anyone, especially alone. You got family here? My father had property 5 miles out. He passed 6 months ago. I've come to claim it. She met his eyes directly. I'm not running from anything, and I'm not whatever Mr. Hansen implied. Didn't think you were, Luke said. Woman running from something doesn't stand her ground like you did. And Hansen implies a lot of things about a lot of people. That's why half the town can't stand him, and the other half only tolerates him because he's the only decent restaurant between here and Albuquerque. Emma returned with 2 plates of beef stew, bread, and what looked like roasted vegetables. Evelyn's stomach clenched with hunger at the sight. She hadn't eaten anything substantial since yesterday's breakfast. Eat, Luke said gently, picking up his own spoon. Story can wait until you've got food in you. They ate in relative silence, though Evelyn was aware of the continued glances from other diners. Some were curious, some disapproving. A few, particularly from the women, showed something that might have been envy or admiration. The man across from her had made himself the subject of gossip simply by treating her like a human being deserving of basic decency. Why? She asked finally, when her plate was half empty and the urgent edge of her hunger had been satisfied. Why help me? You don't know me. Luke set down his spoon and considered her question with apparent seriousness. My mother, he said finally, came out here from Tennessee when she was 19. Just her and my father, and a wagon full of hope. They stopped in a town not much bigger than this one, needed supplies and a meal. Shopkeeper took one look at them, young, dusty, not much money, and decided they were trash, refused to sell to them. He picked up his coffee, cradling the cup in both hands. Man who owned the saloon saw what happened. He was a gambler, not a respectable sort by most measures. But he walked out, introduced himself to my parents, and told that shopkeeper if he didn't sell to these young folks, the saloon would stop buying supplies from him. Made a difference. My parents got what they needed, made it to their land, built a life. That gambler's name was Jack Barrett, my grandfather. He always said that kindness don't cost you nothing, but the lack of it can cost everything. Luke looked at her directly. So when I see someone standing in the hot sun because small-minded folks decided she's not worth a meal, I remember my mother's stories. And I pull up a chair. Evelyn felt something tight in her chest loosen slightly. Your grandfather sounds like he was a good man. He was a complicated man, Luke corrected with a slight smile. But in the ways that mattered, yeah, he was good. They finished their meal. Luke signaled Emma for pie, apple, still warm, and more coffee. As they ate dessert, he asked about her father's property, and she told him what she knew. 160 acres along Cottonwood Creek, a cabin, some outbuildings, a few head of cattle that the neighboring rancher had agreed to look after. That'd be the old Hart place, Luke said, recognition in his voice. I knew your father. Not well. He kept to himself mostly. But I'd see him in town now and then. Quiet man, fair dealer. He bought a calf from me once, paid asking price without haggling. That tells you something about a man's character. He left Boston when I was 12, Evelyn said, the old grief surfacing. After my mother died. He said the city was full of her ghost, and he needed space to breathe. I wrote to him. He wrote back, but I never saw him again. That's hard, Luke said simply, not offering platitudes. Losing someone twice like that. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Luke pushed back his chair and stood. Let me settle up with Hansen, and then I'll take you out to the property. You'll need to see it before dark. Mr. Barrett, you've already done so much. Luke, he corrected, and I'm heading that direction anyway. My ranch borders yours on the eastern side. It's no trouble. At the counter, Evelyn heard Luke's low voice and Hansen's gruff response. Money changed hands. When Luke returned, his expression was neutral, but Evelyn thought she detected satisfaction in his eyes. Ready? He asked. Outside, the sun had shifted lower, throwing long shadows across the dusty street. Luke untied his horse, and then, to Evelyn's surprise, walked toward a wagon parked 2 buildings down. Came in for supplies, he explained. Didn't take my horse, took the wagon. Lucky timing. He helped her up onto the bench seat, his hand brief and respectful on her elbow, then climbed up beside her. The wagon creaked as he turned it, heading toward the edge of town. As they passed the saloon, one of the cowboys from earlier called out something crude. Luke didn't stop, didn't even turn his head, but his jaw tightened. "Ignore them," he said quietly. "They're drunk and stupid, and that combination never leads anywhere good." "I'm used to ignorance," Evelyn said. "Boston has its share of men who think women are decorative creatures, incapable of independent thought." That earned her a surprised glance and a genuine smile. "Something tells me you proved them wrong on multiple occasions." "I was a teacher," she said. "Mathematics and literature. I had male colleagues who couldn't understand why I'd waste my education on elementary students when I could marry and let a husband think for me." "What made you leave?" "This." She gestured toward the open landscape around them as the town fell away behind. "My father's letters spoke of freedom, space, the chance to build something that's entirely your own. And after Charles—" She stopped. "Charles?" Luke prompted gently. "Charles Whitmore, a banker's son. He asked me to marry him." Evelyn smoothed her skirt unnecessarily. "He's a good man, kind, respectable. He would have given me a comfortable life. But you said no." "I said I needed time to settle my father's estate. He offered to come with me to help manage things, to sell the property so we could marry and settle in Boston properly." She looked at Luke. He meant well. He truly did. But when he said help manage, what he meant was take control. The property would have been his by marriage. The decisions his. My father's legacy would have become just another asset in the Whitmore portfolio. Luke nodded slowly. "So you came alone?" "So I came alone," she confirmed. "Charles said I was being irrational, emotional, that Western property was no place for a woman of education and refinement. He said I'd be back in 6 months, ready to accept his proposal and put this foolishness behind me." "What do you think?" Luke asked. Evelyn looked out at the landscape around them. Red rocks thrust up from scrubland dotted with sage and mesquite. The sky was impossibly vast, colored now with the beginnings of sunset, golds and pinks and purples that no Boston sky had ever held. In the distance, mountains rose like ancient sentinels, their peaks still touched with snow despite the summer heat. "I think Charles doesn't understand that some of us need more than comfort," she said quietly. "Some of us need purpose." They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the creak of the wagon, the steady plod of the horse's hooves, and the occasional cry of a hawk overhead. The road, more a track than anything, wound through increasingly wild country. Evelyn saw cattle in the distance, a few buildings that marked other ranches, and endless stretches of land that looked harsh and beautiful in equal measure. "It's not an easy life out here," Luke said eventually. "Beautiful, yes, but hard. Winters can be brutal. Water's always a concern. The land fights you every step of the way. And just when you think you've got a handle on things, something goes wrong. Drought, fire, rustlers, wolves. You'll need help getting established. Need neighbors you can count on." "And will I have that?" Evelyn asked directly. "Neighbors I can count on? Or will everyone in this territory treat me like Hanson did?" Luke was quiet for a long moment, and Evelyn appreciated that he was considering his answer rather than offering easy reassurance. "Honestly, some will. This is hard country, and folks out here have strict ideas about how things should be. A single woman running a ranch alone, that'll make people uncomfortable. Some will refuse to deal with you. Some will try to cheat you because they'll figure you don't know better. And some," he paused, "some will see opportunity. A woman alone, property with no man to protect it. That can bring out the worst in certain types." "You're not filling me with confidence, Mr. Barrett." "Luke," he corrected again, "and I'm not trying to scare you off. Just want you going in with clear eyes. My grandfather also used to say that hope without honesty is just another word for foolishness." He glanced at her. "But here's the other truth. You'll have neighbors who'll help. My ranch is next to yours. The Ramirez family is south of you. Good people. Been here 30 years. Martha Blackwood runs her place alone and has for 15 years since her husband passed. She's tough as old leather and twice as stubborn. She won't help you out of pity, but she'll help you if you prove you're serious about making a go of it." "And you?" Evelyn asked. "Will you help?" Luke's hands were steady on the reins, his eyes on the road ahead. "I pulled up a chair beside you in Hanson's diner. That wasn't just about one meal. That was me telling the town, and telling you, that I'm willing to be counted as an ally. So yes, Miss Hart, I'll help. Not because you're helpless, but because neighbors help each other out here. That's how we all survive." The wagon crested a small rise, and Luke pulled the horse to a stop. "There," he said, pointing. "That's your property." Evelyn looked where he indicated and felt her heart sink. The cabin was small, much smaller than she'd imagined from her father's letters, and its roof sagged in the middle. One window was broken, stuffed with what looked like old rags. The porch listed to one side. Behind it, she could see the remains of outbuildings. A barn with half its walls collapsed, a chicken coop that had given up and surrendered to gravity, and something that might have been a storage shed but was now mostly a pile of weathered lumber. The land itself was beautiful, she had to admit that. Cottonwood trees lined a creek that sparkled in the sunset light. The meadow nearest the cabin was thick with grass that waved in the evening breeze. The mountains beyond framed everything with dramatic purple shadows. But the human structures spoke of years of neglect, of a man who'd been too old or too tired or too alone to keep up with necessary repairs. "It's got good bones," Luke said quietly, echoing words he'd clearly used to comfort himself when surveying his own challenges. "Structure's solid, even if it needs work. That roof will need replacing before winter, but the walls look straight. And the location, creek access, meadow for hay, timber on the north end for firewood and lumber. Your father chose well when he filed this claim." Evelyn couldn't speak. She'd known it would be rough, but the gap between her imagination and this reality felt impossible to bridge. In her mind, she'd pictured something weathered but serviceable, something that needed cleaning and organizing, not complete reconstruction. This looked like defeat. "Hey," Luke said gently. He didn't touch her, but his voice pulled her back from the edge of despair. "I know it looks rough, but I've seen worse made into better. Takes time, takes work, takes help. But it can be done. You came all this way, Miss Hart. Don't give up before you've even stepped inside." She took a shaking breath, then another, then she nodded. "You're right. I didn't come this far to surrender at the sight of a saggy roof." Luke smiled. "There's that fighting spirit your father wrote about." They drove the rest of the way down to the cabin. Luke helped her down from the wagon, and they approached the front door together. It stuck in the frame, swollen from weather, but Luke's shoulder against it did the trick. Inside was better than outside, marginally. Dust covered everything in a thick layer, and animal droppings suggested various creatures had made themselves at home. But there was a wood stove that looked intact, a table and two chairs that seemed sturdy, a bed frame in the single bedroom, and shelves along one wall. Someone, her father, she realized with a pang, had even hung curtains, though they were now faded and torn. On the table, held down by a rock, was an envelope. Her name was written on it in her father's familiar handwriting. Evelyn picked it up with shaking hands. She wanted to open it immediately, but something held her back. This was the last thing he'd left her. Once she read it, there would be no more words from David Hart. The finality of that felt too large for this moment. "I'll give you some privacy," Luke said, reading her expression. "I'm going to check the well, see if the water's still good. Take your time." After he left, Evelyn sat in one of the chairs, testing it first for stability, and carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, dated 3 weeks before his death. "Dearest Evie, if you're reading this, then I've gone on ahead, and you've come to claim what I've left you. I hope you came. I worried you wouldn't, worried this rough country would seem like too much for my educated daughter who deserved better than a broken-down ranch. But I know you, Evie girl. You were always the brave one, always the one who stood up to your sister's bullies, even when you were half their size. You got that from me. Not the best inheritance, I'll admit. Stubbornness and pride have led me down some hard roads. The place isn't much. I know that. I meant to fix it up, meant to make it into something fine before I sent for you and your sister. But time got away from me, and the work was harder than I expected, and somewhere along the line I got old and tired. Story of my life, I suppose. Big dreams, small results. But the land is good. Water's reliable. Soil's rich near the creek. There's timber and grazing and room to grow. It's got potential, Evie, just needs someone young and strong and stubborn enough to unlock it. I wish I could be there to help you. Wish I could teach you about cattle and horses and reading weather signs, but you'll figure it out. You always do. And you'll find help. Folks out here are hard in some ways, but decent in others. Look for the ones who judge you by your work, not your gender. I'm sorry I left you when you were 12. Sorry I wasn't there for your graduation or your teaching certificate or all the moments a father should be present for. Your mother's death broke something in me I couldn't fix, and staying in Boston felt like drowning. Coming west saved my life, even if it meant losing parts of what made that life worth living. I hope you can forgive me. I hope you can make this land into something I never could. And I hope you find what I found: freedom, space, the quiet satisfaction of building something with your own two hands. You're stronger than you know, Evelyn Hart. Show them. All my love, Dad. Evelyn pressed the letter to her chest and let herself cry, quiet tears that felt like both grief and release. He'd known her, known she'd come, known she'd be stubborn enough to try making something of this impossible dream. When Luke returned, she'd composed herself, but he saw the evidence of tears and politely pretended he hadn't. "Well's good," he reported. "Water's clear and cold. That's worth its weight in gold out here. Literally saw a ranch sell last year, primarily because it had reliable water." "What else needs immediate attention?" Evelyn asked, standing and brushing dust from her skirt. "If I'm going to do this, I need to know the full scope." Luke looked at her with something like respect. "All right then, let's make a list." They walked the property as the sun set, Luke pointing out problems and possibilities. The barn could be shored up enough to shelter a horse or two before winter. The chicken coop needed complete rebuilding. Fences were down in multiple places, a priority if she planned to run cattle. The cabin roof would need work soon, but would probably last another month or two if they patched the worst spots. "Your father had about 20 head of cattle," Luke said. Luke, eat. "Old Tom Garrett's been running them with his herd. He's honest. He'll account for everyone and any calves born since your father passed. But you'll need to collect them, and you'll need somewhere to put them. Can't let them run wild on open range with no one watching." "How much will all this cost?" Evelyn asked, thinking of her limited funds. "More than you want to spend and less than you're afraid of," Luke said. "Some things you can do yourself with help. I can teach you what you need to know. Other things you'll need to hire done, but labor's not too expensive if you're willing to feed folks while they work. Biggest cost will be lumber and supplies." They returned to the cabin as the last light faded. Luke lit a lantern he'd found in the barn. Miraculously, there was still oil in it, and they sat at the dusty table making lists by its flickering light. "You got a place to stay tonight?" Luke asked finally. "That boarding house in town?" "Mrs. Patterson's," Evelyn confirmed. "I sent ahead. She's expecting me." "Good. I'll drive you back. You can come out tomorrow. Start clearing out the cabin. I'll send my hand, Miguel, over with some tools you'll need. And," he hesitated, "there's a town meeting Wednesday night at the church, social sort of thing, but it's where business gets discussed. You should come. Let folks see you. Let them know you're serious about staying. Face down the gossip head on rather than letting it build." Evelyn felt her stomach tighten at the thought. Like Hanson's Diner, but with an audience? Like Hanson's Diner, but with the chance to define yourself before others define you, Luke corrected. The diner was them deciding who you were. Wednesday night is you showing them who you are. "And who am I?" Luke looked at her steadily in the lamplight. "From what I've seen, you're David Hart's daughter, a teacher from Boston who's too stubborn to let a saggy roof and Gordon Hanson's prejudices send her running. You're a woman who's about to prove that ownership is about will, not gender. That's who you are." Evelyn felt something warm spread through her chest. Not attraction exactly, though Luke Barrett was certainly not hard to look at. Something bigger than that. Recognition, maybe. Alliance. The first brick in a foundation of trust that this harsh land would require if she was going to survive it. "All right," she said. "Wednesday night. I'll be there." They drove back to town in comfortable silence, the stars emerging one by one overhead, in a sky that held more of them than Evelyn had ever imagined possible. The boarding house was a neat two-story building on the quiet end of Main Street. Luke helped her down from the wagon, then tipped his hat. "Miss Hart, it's been a genuine pleasure." "Thank you," Evelyn said, and she meant it for everything. The meal, the transportation, the honest assessment, the kindness. "I don't know how I'll repay you." "Don't worry about that," Luke said. "Just prove your father right. Show them what you're made of. That'll be payment enough." He climbed back into the wagon, clicked to the horse, and rolled away down the dark street. Evelyn watched until he turned the corner, then turned to face Mrs. Patterson's door. Before she could knock, it opened. A woman in her 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes looked her up and down. "Miss Hart, I presume." "Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry I'm so late." "Late is better than not at all," Mrs. Patterson said briskly, stepping aside. "Though I'll tell you plain, I already heard about your adventure at Hanson's Diner. News travels faster than common sense in this town. You made quite the impression." "I hope not a bad one," Evelyn said carefully. Mrs. Patterson's expression was unreadable. "That depends on who's judging. Some'll say you're trouble. Others'll say you're brave. Me? I say you had the good sense to accept help when it was offered, and that shows more wisdom than the fools who think pride is more important than survival. Your room's ready. First door on the left upstairs. Breakfast is at 7 sharp. Don't be late, or you'll miss it." "Thank you, Mrs. Patterson." "One more thing," the older woman said as Evelyn reached the stairs. "Luke Barrett's a good man, one of the best in this territory, but folks'll talk about you two now, him helping you like that. Won't all be kind talk." "I can't control what people say," Evelyn replied. "No, but you can control how you respond to it. Hold your head high, do your work, and don't give them any real ammunition. That's my advice for what it's worth." Mrs. Patterson's expression softened slightly. "Your father was a decent man. I hope you prove yourself decent too. This town could use more of that and less of the other." Evelyn climbed the stairs to her small, clean room. It held a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the dark street. She could see lamplight in a few windows, hear the distant sound of piano music from a saloon, smell the cooling desert air drifting through her open window. She unpacked her few belongings, hanging her spare dress on a peg, setting her mother's locket on the washstand where the lamplight made it glow. Then she sat on the bed and pulled out her father's letter again, reading it by the light of her single candle. "You're stronger than you know, Evelyn Hart. Show them." Tomorrow she would go back to the cabin and begin the impossible task of making it home. She would scrub and patch and repair. She would face the curiosity and judgment of a town that had already decided she didn't belong. She would learn to read this harsh landscape, to work this unforgiving land, to survive in a place so different from everything she'd known that it might as well be another planet. But tonight, she had a full stomach thanks to a kind stranger, a place to sleep, and her father's last words tucked close to her heart. It wasn't much, but as she blew out her candle and lay down in the darkness, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of a western town settling into night, Evelyn thought maybe it was enough. Maybe it was enough to begin with. Outside her window, a shooting star traced fire across the endless sky. Evelyn closed her eyes and made a wish, not for it to be easy, but for the strength to endure the hard. Then she slept, dreaming of roof beams and fence posts and the quiet satisfaction of building something that would last. The next morning arrived with a clarity that startled Evelyn awake before dawn. She'd forgotten how bright the world could be without city smoke dimming the light. Through her window, she watched the sun paint the eastern sky in shades of rose and gold, colors so vivid they seemed almost artificial. Mrs. Patterson's rooster announced the new day with enthusiastic persistence, joined by a chorus of others across town until Redemption Springs echoed with their declarations. Evelyn dressed in her oldest traveling outfit, a practical gray cotton dress with minimal bustle and sleeves that could be rolled up. She braided her hair tightly and pinned it in a crown around her head, then studied herself in the small mirror above the washstand. She looked pale despite yesterday's sun, her green eyes too large in her face, shadows beneath them from restless sleep. But her jaw was set, her spine straight. She looked like someone ready to work. Breakfast at Mrs. Patterson's was a communal affair served at a long table in the dining room. Evelyn found herself seated between a traveling salesman who talked incessantly about the superiority of his patent medicine and a silent older man who ate with mechanical efficiency. Across from her sat two women, clearly sisters, who watched her with undisguised curiosity. "You're the one from Hanson's Diner," the younger sister said finally, unable to contain herself. She was perhaps 25, pretty in a conventional way, with blonde curls and pink cheeks. The one Luke Barrett defended. "I'm Evelyn Hart," Evelyn said evenly. "I've come to claim my father's property." "Laura, mind your manners," the older sister hissed, but her eyes were just as curious. "I'm Dorothy Manning, and this is my sister Laura. We run the dress shop on Main Street. Your father was... We heard he passed. Our condolences." "Thank you," Evelyn said, taking a bite of Mrs. Patterson's excellent biscuits to avoid further conversation. But Laura wasn't finished. "Is it true you're planning to run the ranch yourself? Without a husband or family to help?" The table went quiet, everyone suddenly interested in their breakfast while listening intently. Evelyn set down her fork and met Laura's gaze directly. "Yes, that's exactly what I'm planning. But how will you manage?" Laura pressed. "Ranching is such difficult work, and you're..." "A woman?" Evelyn supplied when Laura trailed off. "Yes, I'm aware. I'm also educated, determined, and apparently too stubborn to know when something's impossible. My father seemed to think those qualities would serve me well. I intend to prove him right." The older man beside her made a sound that might have been approval or indigestion. Dorothy Manning looked thoughtful. Laura simply stared, clearly uncertain whether to admire or pity this strange woman from Boston. Mrs. Patterson emerged from the kitchen with more coffee. "Eat up, Miss Hart. You'll need your strength. I packed you a lunch. It's on the side table. And there's a young man at the back door asking for you. Mexican fellow with kind eyes. Says Luke Barrett sent him." Evelyn excused herself and found Miguel waiting by the kitchen entrance. He was perhaps 30, compact and strong, with a weathered face and a shy smile. He held his hat in his hands and gave a small bow. "Miss Hart? I'm Miguel Ramirez. Mr. Luke. He asked me to bring tools and help you today. If you want the help, I mean. He say I should ask first, not assume." "I want the help," Evelyn said gratefully. "Thank you, Miguel. Give me 5 minutes to collect my things." They drove out to the property in Miguel's wagon, which was loaded with tools that looked well used and well maintained. Saws, hammers, buckets, brooms, and mysterious implements whose purposes Evelyn could only guess. Miguel didn't talk much, but his silence was comfortable rather than awkward. "How long have you worked for Mr. Barrett?" Evelyn asked as they rattled down the familiar track. 7 years, Miguel said, "since I come here from Mexico. Mr. Luke, he give me job when others won't. Say I work good, I stay. I work good." He smiled slightly. "I stay. He seems like a fair man." "More than fair," Miguel said seriously. "He teach me read English, pay me same as American workers. When my wife gets sick last year, he bring doctor, pay for medicine. Mr. Luke, he good man, best I know." They reached the cabin, and in the morning light it looked both better and worse than Evelyn remembered. Better, because sunlight showed the straight lines of the structure, the solid foundation, the way it had been built to last. Worse, because that same sunlight illuminated every crack, every broken board, every sign of neglect. Miguel surveyed the property with a practiced eye. "First, we clean inside," he decided. "Make place you can sleep if you need to. Then we fix what keep weather out. Then we work on what make work easier, okay?" "Very okay," Evelyn said, rolling up her sleeves. They worked through the morning in a rhythm that surprised Evelyn with its naturalness. Miguel showed her how to properly wield a broom to avoid raising too much dust, how to test floorboards for rot, how to measure window frames for replacement glass. He spoke little but demonstrated everything clearly, patient when she made mistakes, encouraging when she got things right. By noon, the cabin's interior had been transformed. The floor was clean, the stove cleared of debris and tested. It worked, Miguel declared with satisfaction. The windows were washed, even the broken one with its rag stuffing, which let in enough light to make the single room feel almost cheerful. They'd moved the broken furniture outside to assess for repair, and Evelyn had scrubbed the table and chairs until her hands ached. They ate Mrs. Patterson's lunch in the shade gate of the cottonwood trees by the creek. thick sandwiches, apples, and cookies that tasted like cinnamon and hope. The creek murmured past, and birds Evelyn couldn't identify called to each other in the branches above. "Your father," Miguel said suddenly. "He'd talk about you sometimes. In town, when he buy supplies. Say he have daughter who teach children, who read many books. He very proud, I think." Evelyn's throat tightened. He never said that in his letters. "Some men, they no good with words on paper," Miguel said wisely. "But when they talk, when they drink coffee, and their face change, then you know what's in the heart." In the afternoon, they tackled the roof. Miguel climbed up with the confidence of long practice, while Evelyn handed up tools and supplies. He showed her the worst spots, explained how water had gotten under shingles and rotted the boards beneath. They patched what they could, but Miguel's assessment was the same as Luke's had been. "Before snow, this need new," he said, pointing to a section that sagged ominously. "Maybe November, we get first snow. So October, we fix. I help, if you want." "I want," Evelyn said. "And I'll pay you fair wages for your time." Miguel looked uncomfortable. "Mr. Luke, he already pay me." "Mr. Luke sent you to teach me and help me get started," Evelyn corrected firmly. "That's different from hiring you for a specific job. When we re-roof this cabin, that's my responsibility and my expense. I won't have charity, Miguel. I'll have fair dealing or nothing." Something shifted in Miguel's expression. "Respect," she thought. "Okay," he said. "Fair dealing. I tell you cost for labor when time come." They worked until the sun began its descent toward the mountains. Miguel taught her how to split wood properly, how to stack it so it would dry in season, how to judge whether timber was sound or rotted. Every lesson was practical, immediately useful, and Evelyn absorbed them like a plant too long deprived of water. As they prepared to leave, Miguel walked the fence line with her, pointing out where breaks needed mending. "Maybe 25 posts need replace," he estimated. "Wire in some places. This take time, but not too hard. I show you how. You do yourself. Save money that way." "Thank you," Evelyn said, "for everything. For being patient with someone who knows nothing." Miguel smiled. "You know more than you think. You know how to work, how to listen, how to no give up when things hard. Those things more important than knowing about fence posts. Fence posts, anybody can learn. The other things?" He shrugged. "Those come from inside." As they drove back toward town, Miguel suddenly cleared his throat. "Miss Hart, I should tell you something. There's talk about you and Mr. Luke." Evelyn's stomach tightened. "What kind of talk?" "Some people, they say things not nice. They say, woman alone with man. They make it dirty when it not." Miguel's face showed his distaste. "My wife, Elena, she hear this talk at the store. She say I should warn you, not because the talk is true, but because the talk can hurt." "I appreciate the warning," Evelyn said, "but I won't let gossip dictate my actions. Mr. Barrett helped me when no one else would. I won't repay that kindness by avoiding him to protect my reputation." Miguel nodded approvingly. "Elena, she say you would say something like this. She say you have spine. She also say you should come for dinner tomorrow night. Meet her, meet our children. Show the town you have friends, you have support. Make the gossips work harder to make their lies stick." Evelyn felt unexpected warmth flood through her. "I'd be honored. Thank you, Miguel. And please thank Elena." That evening at Mrs. Patterson's, Evelyn found a package waiting in her room. Inside was a jar of salve with a note in Luke's handwriting. "For hands not used to ranch work yet, apply before bed. L.B." The salve smelled of herbs and beeswax. Evelyn rubbed it into her blistered palms and aching fingers, touched by the thoughtfulness of the gesture. She was learning that kindness here came in practical forms, tools and knowledge and healing salve rather than flowery words and empty gestures. The next morning, Evelyn returned to the cabin alone, driving a rented buggy she'd arranged through the livery stable. The owner, a gruff man named Henderson, had tried to overcharge her until she'd calmly recited the standard rates she'd learned from casual conversation the previous day. He'd grudgingly adjusted his price, but his expression had made clear what he thought of women who knew too much. She spent the day continuing the work Miguel had started, cleaning the bedroom, assessing the condition of the bed frame, making lists of supplies she'd need. Around noon, she heard hoofbeats and looked up to see Luke Barrett riding toward the cabin. He dismounted with easy grace, carrying a canteen and what looked like a wrapped package. "Thought you might be out here," he said. "Brought lunch. Hope you haven't eaten yet." "I was just about to have a very sad apple," Evelyn admitted. They sat on the now clean porch, and Luke unpacked bread, cheese, dried meat, and tomatoes that tasted like summer sun. "Miguel said you worked hard yesterday. Said you've got good instincts for someone new to ranch work. Miguel is a good teacher, and diplomatic enough to make my complete ignorance sound like instincts." Luke smiled. "You hear about Wednesday night? The town meeting? Yes, you mentioned it." "Heard some talk in town this morning," Luke said carefully. "Folks are curious about you. Some are taking bets on how long you'll last before you head back to Boston." "What are the odds?" Evelyn asked with more lightness than she felt. "Most give you until first snowfall. A few generous souls say you might make it to spring." He took a bite of bread. "Nobody's betting on you staying permanently." "Except you?" Luke met her eyes. "I don't bet against people who've got something to prove. Those are the dangerous ones, the ones who will work twice as hard because everyone expects them to fail." They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes. Then Luke said, "I need to tell you something. Old Tom Garrett stopped by my place this morning. He's been running your cattle with his herd like I mentioned. He wants to bring them back over, get them off his land before winter." "That's good, isn't it? I need them here." "Problem is, your fences aren't ready. You turn cattle loose on this property without proper fencing, they'll wander off or onto other folks' land. That causes problems, territorial disputes, damage to crops, lost animals. Your father had agreements with the neighbors about boundaries. You'll need to honor those agreements, which means having fences that work." Evelyn felt the weight of another task, another expense, another thing she didn't know how to do. How long to fix the fences? With help? Maybe 2 weeks of hard work. Longer if you're trying to do it alone while also doing everything else. Luke hesitated. "I could lend you some hands. Miguel and another worker named James. They know fence work, could teach you while they help get it done faster." "At what cost?" "Feed them while they work, pay for materials, that's it." "That's charity," Evelyn said flatly. "That's neighboring," Luke corrected. "Next year when I need help with spring branding or someone gets hurt and I'm short-handed, you'll return the favor. That's how it works out here. We help each other because the land's too hard to face alone." Evelyn studied his face, looking for condescension or pity. She found only straightforward honesty. "All right," she said finally, "but I keep track. When you need help, I want to know about it. I won't be in anyone's debt." "Deal." Luke extended his hand and they shook on it. His grip was warm and firm, a promise made physical. Over the next week, a pattern emerged. Evelyn would arrive at the cabin each morning, work until she couldn't see straight, then return to Mrs. Patterson's exhausted but satisfied. Miguel came 3 days that week, bringing supplies and knowledge. On the other days, Luke would stop by around midday, always with some practical reason, checking on her progress, delivering materials, assessing the well pump that needed repair. She began to understand that his visits served multiple purposes. Yes, he was helping her learn what she needed to know. But he was also making a statement to anyone who might be watching. Evelyn Hart was not alone, not defenseless, not fair game. His presence was protection, even when he wasn't actively doing anything. The gossip Miguel had warned her about reached Evelyn's ears in fragments. Mrs. Patterson's other boarders sometimes fell silent when she entered a room or spoke in obvious whispers that made clear she was the subject. At the general store, when she went to purchase supplies, she felt eyes following her, heard the murmur of conversation stop and start like a wave. But there were kindnesses, too. Elena Ramirez proved to be a warm, practical woman who welcomed Evelyn to dinner with genuine enthusiasm. Their children, 3 boys ranging from 5 to 11, were shy at first but warmed up when Evelyn asked them about school. Elena's sister was there too, with her husband, and the evening was full of Spanish and English mixing together, laughter, and the best tamales Evelyn had ever tasted. "You need women friends," Elena said firmly as they cleaned up after dinner. "Men can teach you about fences and cattle, But women teach you how to survive out here without losing yourself. You come to me when you need to talk, yes? Or when you need to learn cooking or preserving or how to deal with men who think women are decorations. Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes at the unconditional welcome. Thank you, she managed. De nada, Elena said, squeezing her hand. We women, we must help each other, especially in a place like this where the men make all the rules and expect us to just smile and nod. Wednesday evening arrived with Evelyn's nerves stretched tight. She dressed in her best dress, a deep blue cotton with modest trim, and pinned her hair carefully. In the mirror, she looked respectable, professional, utterly terrified. Mrs. Patterson knocked on her door as Evelyn was pulling on her gloves. Ready for battle? Is that what this is? Every new woman in this town faces the same test, Mrs. Patterson said matter-of-factly. They'll measure you by how you dress, how you speak, who you associate with, and whether you show proper deference to the established order. Some will be fair, others will be looking for any excuse to dismiss you. How did you pass the test? Evelyn asked. Mrs. Patterson smiled thinly. I arrived 30 years ago with my husband. He died 6 months later. I had this house and no other means of support, so I opened it as a boarding house. Half the town said I should sell and move back east, that running a business was unladylike. I told them what they could do with their advice. In more polite terms, of course, and I've been here ever since. Eventually, they got tired of expecting me to fail. So persistence is the key? Persistence and refusing to apologize for taking up space in the world. Mrs. Patterson handed Evelyn a shawl. Hold your head high. Answer questions directly. Don't volunteer unnecessary information, but don't hide either. And remember, you have every right to be here. Your father's claim is legal. His will is legal. You are the legitimate owner of that property, and nobody can take that from you. The church was already crowded when Evelyn arrived. The space served multiple purposes: religious services on Sunday, community meetings throughout the week, occasionally a schoolroom when weather prevented classes in the regular building. Tonight it was arranged with rows of chairs facing a small platform where several men sat looking self-important. Evelyn recognized Gordon Hanson among them, which made her stomach clench. But there was also a kind-faced older man she'd seen around town, a silver-haired woman who carried herself with authority, and a younger man in a nice suit who might have been a lawyer or banker. Luke was near the back, standing against the wall. He caught her eye and gave a subtle nod. Miguel and Elena were there too, with Elena's sister. Even Martha Blackwood, the widow Luke had mentioned, sat in the third row, her weathered face expressionless but her eyes sharp. Evelyn took a seat toward the middle, not front row where she'd be too visible, not back where she'd seem timid. A reasonable position for someone who belonged but wasn't making unnecessary claims. The meeting began with routine business: reports on the recent cattle sales, discussion of road repairs needed before winter, complaints about a fence dispute between two neighboring ranches. Evelyn listened carefully, learning the rhythms of how decisions were made, who held influence, where the power actually resided versus where it appeared to sit. Then Gordon Hanson cleared his throat. There's one more matter we should address. We have a new resident in the territory. Miss Evelyn Hart, late of Boston, has arrived to claim the Hart property. All eyes turned to Evelyn. She kept her expression neutral, her hands folded calmly in her lap. Now, we're all sorry for her loss, Hanson continued with false sympathy. David Hart was a decent enough fellow, if a bit solitary, but the situation raises some concerns. A single woman, alone on a remote property, with no experience in ranching or livestock management. It's a recipe for disaster. What kind of concerns, Gordon? The silver-haired woman asked dryly. Concern for her welfare, or concern that she might actually succeed? A ripple of amusement ran through the crowd. Hanson's face reddened. Concern for the community, Martha. If her cattle wander onto other properties because she can't manage them properly, that affects everyone. If she can't maintain her property and it becomes an eyesore or a hazard, that affects property values. And if something happens to her out there alone, he let the implication hang. Mr. Hanson, Evelyn said clearly, rising to her feet. Every head swiveled back to her. May I address these concerns directly? The kind-faced older man on the platform nodded. Please do, Miss Hart. I'm Judge William Morrison. I knew your father. Good man. You have the floor. Evelyn took a breath and stepped into the aisle, where everyone could see her. Thank you, Judge Morrison. Mr. Hanson, you're right that I'm new to ranching. I don't pretend otherwise, but I'm not stupid and I'm not reckless. I've spent the past week learning from people who know this land and this work. I've begun repairs on the property. I've assessed what needs to be done and made plans to address those needs methodically. Plans are one thing, Hanson interrupted. Execution is another. Ranching takes strength, experience. It takes willingness to work. Evelyn cut him off, her voice sharp. I have that. It takes willingness to learn. I have that too. And before you suggest that being a woman makes me inherently incapable, I'd remind you that Martha Blackwood has run her ranch alone for 15 years. Elena Ramirez manages her household, helps with her family's ranch, and raises 3 sons while her husband works. Women all over this territory are doing what you seem to think is impossible. Martha Blackwood made a sound of approval. Several women in the audience murmured agreement. As for my cattle affecting the community, Evelyn continued, I'm currently working to repair my fences to proper standards before I take possession of my herd. Tom Garrett has kindly agreed to keep them with his for a few more weeks while I complete that work. Once my fences are sound, my cattle will be properly contained, just as my father's were. And if you fail? Hanson pressed. If it proves too hard and you give up, what happens to the property then? If I fail, which I don't intend to do, then I'll sell the property to someone who can manage it, just as anyone else would in similar circumstances. Evelyn met his eyes directly. But I notice you're not holding meetings about whether the Miller brothers can manage their father's ranch after his passing, and they're younger than I am with less education. Somehow their competence isn't being publicly questioned. That's different, Hanson started. Only because they're men, Evelyn said flatly. Let's be honest about what this is really about. You're uncomfortable with a woman owning property independently. You're uncomfortable with me making decisions without male oversight. But my discomfort with your discomfort doesn't change the legal reality. I own that land. I intend to work it. And whether you approve or not is, frankly, irrelevant. The church had gone completely silent. Then, from the back, Luke's voice carried forward clearly. For what it's worth, I've seen Miss Hart's work this past week. She's got good instincts, and she's willing to take instruction. I've offered to help her get established, as any good neighbor would. I'd encourage others to do the same instead of betting on her failure. No one's betting, Hanson sputtered. Yes, you are, Martha Blackwood said, standing. Her voice carried authority earned through years of surviving what most men couldn't. You're all betting she'll fail so you can feel justified in your prejudices. But here's what I see. A young woman with education, determination, and legal claim to good property. That's more than most folks start with. I say we give her a fair chance instead of stacking the deck against her. Judge Morrison nodded slowly. I'm inclined to agree. Miss Hart, you're welcome in this community. We hope you'll succeed. If you need guidance or assistance, don't hesitate to ask. That's what neighbors do. Thank you, Judge Morrison, Evelyn said, her voice steadier than her knees felt. As she sat down, she felt Elena squeeze her shoulder from the row behind. The meeting moved on to other business, but Evelyn barely heard it. Her heart was pounding, her hands shaking slightly with the aftermath of adrenaline. She'd done it, faced them down, stated her case, refused to apologize for existing. After the meeting ended, people filed out slowly. Several women approached Evelyn with words of support or encouragement. A few men nodded greetings, including Judge Morrison, who shook her hand warmly, but many more simply left without acknowledging her, and she heard fragments of conversation that made clear not everyone agreed with the judge's welcome. Luke appeared at her elbow as the crowd thinned. That was something, he said quietly. Was it foolish? Evelyn asked, being so direct? It was honest, and it was brave. You didn't hide or apologize or play weak. You stated facts and dared them to refute you. He smiled slightly. Your father would have been proud. Martha Blackwood approached, moving with the careful stiffness of someone whose joints protested. Up close, she was even more formidable, tall, weathered, with eyes that missed nothing. You've got spine, she said without preamble. That's good. You'll need it. But spine alone won't get you through winter. Come by my place Saturday. I'll show you what you need to know about preparing for snow and cold. Things men don't think to teach because they don't understand how women work. Thank you, Evelyn said, touched. I'd be grateful. Don't be grateful yet. I work you hard and I don't tolerate laziness or self-pity, but if you can handle that, I'll teach you how to survive out here. Martha turned to Luke. You're doing right by her, Barrett. Keep it up, and keep it appropriate. Last thing she needs is more ammunition for the gossips. She walked away before either of them could respond. Luke looked slightly abashed. Martha doesn't mince words. I'm starting to appreciate that quality, Evelyn said. They walked outside together, into a night turned cool now that the sun was down. Stars blazed overhead, and Evelyn still couldn't get used to how many there were, how bright. Luke walked her toward Mrs. Patterson's boarding house, a respectful distance between them, his horse trailing behind on its lead. You handled yourself well in there, he said. But you should know what you said about the Miller brothers, about men not being questioned the same way. That'll stick in people's craws. Truth often does. Should I have stayed quiet? Evelyn asked. No, Luke said firmly. Quiet wouldn't have helped. They were testing you, seeing if you'd back down or defend yourself. You defended yourself with facts and logic. Some folks will respect that even if they don't like it. Others will dig in harder. But either way, they know now that you're not going to be pushed around. They reached the boarding house, and Luke tipped his hat. Good night, Miss Hart. I'll stop by the property Friday, help you with those fence posts Miguel marked. And I'll bring James like I mentioned. He's better than me at explaining the fine points of fence building. Thank you, Luke, Evelyn said, using his first name for the first time. For everything. For standing up for me in there. For all of it. Something shifted in his expression, softened. You're welcome, Evelyn. Sleep well. You've earned it. She watched him ride away, then turned to find Mrs. Patterson standing in the doorway. The older woman's expression was approving. You did good tonight. Real good. Come on inside. I've got hot tea and a piece of advice about dealing with Martha Blackwood. In her room later, Evelyn sat by the window and watched the town settle into sleep. Lamplight winked out window by window. The saloon music faded. The night sounds of the desert emerged. Coyotes in the distance, the rustle of wind through dry grass, the creak of buildings adjusting to the temperature change. She thought about the meeting, about Hanson's barely concealed hostility and the judge's fairness and Martha Blackwood's fierce approval. She thought about Luke's steady support and Elena's warm friendship and Miguel's quiet teaching. She was building something here, she realized. Not just repairing a cabin or fixing fences, but constructing a network of relationships that might, eventually, feel like belonging. It wouldn't be easy. The opposition was real, the challenges substantial, the odds still stacked against her. But for the first time since arriving in Redemption Springs, Evelyn felt something beyond determination or duty. She felt possibility. She felt like maybe, just maybe, she could actually do this. Outside her window, a shooting star traced its brief, brilliant path across the darkness. Evelyn closed her eyes and made the same wish she'd made that first night, not for ease, but for strength. Then she climbed into bed, her body aching from work, her mind buzzing with plans, and slept the deep, dreamless sleep of someone who'd fought a battle and lived to face another day. Friday morning brought Luke and James as promised, arriving just after dawn with a wagon full of fence posts and wire. James turned out to be a man of about 40, with skin darkened by years under the sun, and hands that moved with the confidence of someone who'd built more fences than he could count. He nodded a greeting to Evelyn, but wasted no time on pleasantries, immediately unloading supplies with efficient precision. Best lights in the morning, he explained, his voice carrying a slight drawl. Get the hard work done before the heat gets mean. You know how to dig post holes? I'm about to learn, Evelyn said, rolling up her sleeves. What followed were hours of backbreaking work that made everything she'd done previously seem easy by comparison. James showed her how to use the post hole digger, how to judge depth and width, how to set the post straight and pack the earth around it so it would hold through wind and weather. Luke worked alongside them, his shirt dark with sweat by mid-morning, his movements economical and practiced. They worked mostly in silence, the kind that came from shared labor rather than awkwardness. When they did speak, it was to teach or correct or occasionally joke. James had a dry sense of humor that caught Evelyn off guard, making her laugh when he compared her first attempt at post setting to a drunk man's idea of straight. "Now you're getting it," he said approvingly when her fourth post went in clean and true. "Feels good, don't it? Making something solid, something that'll last." It did feel good, despite the ache in her shoulders and the blisters forming on top of the old ones. There was satisfaction in seeing the fence line extend post by post, marking the boundary of what was hers. Luke had been right about the work providing its own rewards. Around noon, Elena appeared with her youngest son, carrying baskets that proved to contain enough food for a small army. "Miguel told me you worked today," she said, spreading a blanket under the cottonwoods. "So I bring lunch. No arguing. You feed people who help you. That's the rule." They ate heartily, the food tasting better for being earned. Elena's son, shy at first, gradually warmed up to Evelyn's questions about school and his favorite games. Luke and James traded stories about difficult fence jobs they'd tackled over the years, each tale more improbable than the last. "You remember the Hutchins place?" James asked Luke. "When that bull decided the fence was his personal enemy?" "Destroyed 20 yards of brand new fencing in about 5 minutes," Luke confirmed. "Hutchins was fit to be tied. We had to rebuild it twice before he finally sold that damn bull." "What happened to the bull?" Evelyn asked. "Became someone's dinner," James said cheerfully. "Sometimes that's the only solution to a stubborn problem. Though I don't recommend that approach with all your challenges." He grinned at her. "Most of them you got to face head on." After lunch, they returned to work. Elena stayed, bringing her sewing to occupy her hands while she kept Evelyn company. Her presence changed the dynamic subtly, making the work feel more communal, less like charity being extended to someone helpless. "You did good at the meeting," Elena said conversationally as Evelyn struggled with a particularly stubborn rock in the next post hole. "I hear about it from everyone. Some people angry, some people impressed. You make people think, and that make them uncomfortable." "I didn't mean to make people angry," Evelyn said, pausing to wipe sweat from her face. "Sometimes truth makes people angry. That's their problem, not yours." Elena's needle flashed in the sunlight. "My family, we come here 25 years ago. People look at us, see Mexicans, think we don't belong. But we work hard, we prove ourselves, and slowly they forget we're supposed to be different. You do the same. Work hard, prove yourself. Eventually they forget you're supposed to fail because you're a woman." "Eventually sounds like a long time." "It is long time," Elena agreed. "But what else you gonna do? Give up? Go back to Boston and marry the banker's son?" Evelyn laughed despite her exhaustion. "How did you know about Charles?" "Miguel has big ears. He hears things, tells me things. I know things." Elena smiled. "This Charles, he sounds very boring, very, what's the word? Predictable. You come all this way to be unpredictable, to surprise yourself. Yes?" "Yes," Evelyn said softly. "That's exactly right." By the time the sun began its descent toward the mountains, they'd set 23 posts, strung wire between them, and created a fence line that would make any rancher proud. Evelyn's hands were bloody despite her gloves. Her back screamed with every movement, and she was fairly certain she'd never been more exhausted in her entire life. "You'll feel worse tomorrow," James said cheerfully as they packed up tools. "Day after work like this is always hardest, but you push through, keep moving, and by the third day you'll be fine. Mostly fine, anyway." "That's encouraging," Evelyn said dryly, making him laugh. Luke lingered after James and Elena left, ostensibly to check the gate they'd installed, but really, Evelyn suspected, to make sure she could actually make it back to town without falling off the wagon. She appreciated the concern even as she resented needing it. "You did good today," he said, leaning against the fence post and looking out over the property. "Real good. That fence will hold through anything now." "Thanks to you and James." "Thanks to all of us," he corrected. "You learned fast and worked hard. That matters more than experience sometimes." He was quiet for a moment, then said carefully, "Tomorrow's Saturday. You're supposed to go to Martha's?" "That's the plan. Assuming I can move tomorrow." "You'll move. It'll hurt, but you'll move." Luke pushed off from the fence post. "I should warn you, Martha's teaching methods are intense. She doesn't believe in coddling, but what she teaches you will keep you alive when winter comes, so don't take offense if she's harsh." "I appreciate the warning," Evelyn started toward the buggy she'd rented, then turned back. Luke, I need to ask you something. The help you're giving me, the time, the labor, the knowledge, how do I repay it? You keep saying it's neighboring, but it feels unbalanced. You've given so much, and I've given nothing. Luke considered this seriously, which she appreciated. He didn't brush off her concern with platitudes. You're right that it's unbalanced right now, he said finally. That's how neighboring works in the beginning. When someone's getting established, others give more than they take, but it evens out over time. Next year or the year after, I'll need something. Maybe extra hands for a roundup, or help when someone gets hurt, or just a friendly ear when things are hard. You'll be the one giving then, and someone else will be receiving. It's a long game, Evelyn, not something you settle up at the end of each week. And if I fail, she asked quietly, if I can't make it work and I have to sell, then you'll have given all this for nothing. Then I'll have helped someone who needed it, and that's not nothing, Luke said. My grandfather taught me that you don't help people because you're guaranteed a return on investment. You help because it's right, because we're all one bad season or one piece of bad luck away from being the person who needs help. You build community by giving when you can, not by calculating whether you'll profit from kindness. Evelyn felt something shift in her chest, a loosening of anxiety she hadn't fully acknowledged. Your grandfather really was a wise man. He had his moments. Luke smiled. Now get back to town before it's full dark, and use that salve tonight. Your hands are going to be angry with you. The ride back to Redemption Springs gave Evelyn time to think. The work was harder than she'd imagined, the learning curve steeper, the physical demands more brutal. But there was satisfaction in it that her teaching had never provided. Each fence post, each repaired board, each cleaned corner of the cabin was tangible proof of progress. She could see what she'd accomplished, measure it, take pride in it. In Boston, her days had been filled with abstractions, lessons taught, papers graded, knowledge conveyed but rarely manifested in physical form. Here, everything was concrete. The fence either stood or it didn't. The roof either leaked or it was sound. The work of her hands produced results she could touch and see and know were real. Mrs. Patterson had hot water waiting when Evelyn arrived, as if she'd somehow known what would be needed. Bath's ready in the washroom, she said, taking in Evelyn's bedraggled appearance. I'll bring dinner up to your room. You're in no state for the dining table tonight. The hot water was heaven on Evelyn's abused muscles. She soaked until it cooled, applied Luke's salve generously, and ate Mrs. Patterson's stew in her nightgown while sitting on her bed. Every movement hurt, but it was the good kind of hurt, the kind that came from useful labor rather than injury. She slept deeply and woke Saturday morning to discover James had been right. The second day was worse. Her muscles had stiffened overnight, and getting out of bed required genuine courage. But she forced herself up, dressed carefully, and made her way downstairs with as much dignity as she could muster. Martha Blackwood's place is about 3 miles west, Mrs. Patterson said over breakfast. Take the fork past Henderson's livery, follow it until you see a painted gate, white with black trim. That's her spread. And Miss Hart? Don't be late. Martha values punctuality like most folks value gold. Evelyn arrived at Martha's ranch precisely at 9 o'clock to find the older woman waiting on her porch, arms crossed, expression unreadable. The ranch was immaculate, fences in perfect repair, buildings freshly painted, animals healthy and well-tended. This was clearly the work of someone who'd mastered every aspect of ranch management through sheer determination and decades of practice. You're on time, Martha said approvingly. That's a point in your favor. Come on, we've got ground to cover, and I don't waste daylight on chit-chat. What followed was the most intensive education Evelyn had ever received. Martha showed her the root cellar she'd dug herself, explaining how to store vegetables to last through winter, which crops kept best, how to prevent rot and pest damage. She demonstrated food preservation techniques, drying, smoking, canning, with the efficiency of long practice. Winter out here isn't like Boston winter, Martha said as she showed Evelyn how to properly seal jars. You can't just run to a store when you run out of something. You survive on what you put by during the growing season. Run out of food in January, and you're in real trouble. Nearest town might be unreachable for weeks if the snow's bad. She taught Evelyn about medical supplies, showing her a cabinet stocked with herbs, medicines, and basic surgical tools that made Evelyn blanch. You'll need to learn basic doctoring, Martha said flatly. Not just for yourself, for your animals too. Can't afford a vet for every little thing, and sometimes there's no time to fetch one anyway. Cattle get sick, horses get injured, and you'll need to handle it. I've never, Evelyn started. I know you've never. That's why I'm teaching you. Martha's voice was sharp, but not unkind. I've never done lots of things before I had to do them to survive. You learn fast or you learn hard. I prefer you learn fast. They moved to the barn, where Martha demonstrated equipment maintenance, showing Evelyn how to oil leather to prevent cracking, how to sharpen tools properly, how to recognize when something was worn beyond repair and needed replacing. Every lesson was practical, essential, delivered without sentiment, but with clear concern for Evelyn's welfare. You're not naturally suited to this life, Martha said bluntly as they stopped for lunch. You're educated, refined, used to comfort and civilization. That's not a criticism, it's just fact. But I've seen plenty of people who seemed natural to ranch life fail because they were lazy or stupid or too proud to learn. You're none of those things. You work hard, you listen, and you're not too proud to admit what you don't know. That counts for more than being born to it. Thank you, Evelyn said, surprised by the compliment hidden in the harsh assessment. Don't thank me yet. I'm not done with you. Martha bit into an apple with teeth that were still remarkably sound for her age. Now, let's talk about the real danger you're facing. The real danger? Evelyn had thought they'd been discussing real dangers all morning. Men, Martha said flatly. Specifically, the kind of men who see a woman alone and think it's an opportunity. You've got land, water rights, and no husband. That makes you valuable and vulnerable in equal measure. Some men will try to court you to get access to your property. Others will try to buy you out at unfair prices. And a few, not many but a few, will try worse things. Evelyn's stomach clenched. What kind of worse things? Intimidation, sabotage, making it so hard for you to succeed that you'll give up and sell to them cheap. Martha's eyes were hard. I'm not trying to scare you. I'm trying to prepare you. When my husband died, I had 3 different men try to force me to sell within the first 6 months. One tried legal pressure, claiming my husband owed him money he didn't. One tried to court me, thinking I'd be so grateful for male attention that I'd marry him and let him take over. And one, she paused. One tried to burn my hay barn. Thought if he made me desperate enough, I'd have to sell. What did you do? Evelyn whispered. Fought back, proved the debt was false, rejected the suitor publicly, and made sure everyone knew why, and caught the arsonist in the act. Turns out sitting up nights with a rifle is excellent motivation for someone to confess. Martha smiled grimly. I'm not saying you'll face all that. Times have changed some, and you've got Luke Barrett standing with you, which will make some men think twice. But you need to be ready, need to be vigilant, and need to be willing to fight when fighting's required. How do I know who to trust? Evelyn asked. You trust people who treat you like a person instead of a problem or an opportunity. You trust people whose actions match their words over time. And you trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Martha stood, brushing crumbs from her skirt. Now come on, I'm going to teach you to shoot properly. You've got a rifle, I assume? My father's. It's at the cabin. Good. We'll use mine for today's lesson. Every woman out here needs to know how to handle a gun, whether she likes it or not. It's not about being violent. It's about being capable of defending yourself if necessary. The afternoon was spent learning firearms safety, basic marksmanship, and the weight of knowing she might someday need to point a weapon at another human being. Martha was a patient teacher in this as in everything else, making sure Evelyn understood not just how to shoot, but when and why. A gun is not a threat you wave around to scare people, Martha said firmly. You only draw if you're prepared to use it, and you only use it if there's no other choice. But when that moment comes, if it comes, you can't hesitate. Hesitation gets you hurt or killed. You understand? I understand, Evelyn said, though her hands shook slightly as she held the rifle. By the time Evelyn left Martha's ranch, the sun was setting and her head was spinning with information. Martha had given her a list of supplies to acquire before winter, a schedule for food preservation work that needed to happen over the next 2 months, and a standing invitation to return any time she had questions. You'll do all right, Martha said as Evelyn climbed into her buggy. You've got the spine for it. Just don't let anyone convince you that spine isn't enough. Spine, stubbornness, and hard work. That's all it takes. Well, that and good neighbors willing to help. You've got Luke Barrett, and that's worth more than you probably realize. He's one of the genuine good ones, and they're rarer than you'd hope. Everyone speaks highly of him, Evelyn said carefully. That's because he's earned it, but be careful, girl. Martha's voice was serious. Not of him. I don't think he'd ever harm you. But of the situation. People are already talking about you two. You're spending a lot of time together, and folks will make assumptions. Some of those assumptions might force your hand in ways you're not ready for. We're just neighbors helping each other, Evelyn protested. I know that. You know that. He probably knows that. But a town full of gossips doesn't care about truth. They care about appearances. And the appearance is a handsome single man spending considerable time with an unmarried woman. Eventually, someone's going to expect that to lead somewhere. Just be aware of it. Be prepared for it. Evelyn drove back to town thinking about Martha's warning. She'd been so focused on the practical challenges of establishing herself that she hadn't fully considered the social implications of accepting Luke's help. But Martha was right. People were watching, judging, drawing conclusions. And those conclusions might create complications neither she nor Luke had anticipated. That evening at Mrs. Patterson's, Evelyn wrote letters by lamplight. One to her sister in Boston, carefully cheerful and optimistic, downplaying the hardships. One to Charles Whitmore, politely declining his repeated offers to come help her sort out this mess. And one to her father, never to be sent, telling him about the fence posts and the shooting lessons and the gradual, painful process of becoming someone who belonged to this hard, beautiful land. Sunday she spent at the cabin, working alone for the first time in weeks. The solitude was both peaceful and unsettling. Without Luke or Miguel or Elena to fill the silence with conversation or instruction, she became acutely aware of how isolated the property was. Her nearest neighbor was Luke's ranch, over a mile away. The town was 5 miles distant. If something went wrong, if she was injured or threatened or simply in trouble, help might not arrive in time. She pushed the thought aside and focused on work, cleaning the bedroom thoroughly and making it habitable. She'd purchased basic bedding in town, and now she made up the bed with sheets that smelled of lavender and soap. It wasn't much, but it was hers. This cabin, this land, this future she was building one fence post at a time, all hers. As afternoon faded toward evening, she heard hoofbeats approaching. Her heart jumped, and she instinctively reached for the iron poker by the stove before recognizing Luke's familiar silhouette against the sunset. Didn't mean to startle you, he called, dismounting. Just wanted to check on things, make sure the fence is holding. It's holding, Evelyn said, setting down the poker and trying not to feel foolish. Everything's fine. But Luke's eyes had gone to the poker, then to her face, and understanding crossed his features. Martha got you thinking about security. Martha got me thinking about a lot of things. Luke nodded slowly. She has that effect. Listen, I know she probably told you some hard truths about the risks you're facing, and she's not wrong. There are dangers out here, especially for someone alone. But I want you to know something. He met her eyes directly. You're not as alone as you might feel. My ranch is close enough that I can hear gunshots from here. You fire 3 shots in quick succession, I'll come running. So will Miguel, and probably Tom Garrett from the other side. We look out for each other out here. That's not charity or pity, that's survival. 3 shots, Evelyn repeated. I'll remember. I hope you never need to use it. Luke glanced at the sky, where the first stars were emerging. You heading back to town tonight? I was planning to, Evelyn said, though she'd been dreading the lonely ride in the dark. I'll ride with you. Not because you can't handle it alone, he added quickly when he saw her expression, but because it's getting dark, and the road can be tricky when you can't see properly. Besides, I need to pick up supplies from Henderson's first thing tomorrow anyway. Makes sense to stay in town tonight. They rode together in comfortable silence, the darkness gathering around them like a blanket. The night sounds of the desert emerged, coyotes calling to each other, the rustle of small creatures in the brush, the occasional cry of an owl hunting. Evelyn was learning to read this landscape by sound as much as sight, learning which noises were normal and which required attention. You know what Martha said about people talking? Evelyn asked suddenly. About us? Luke's posture shifted slightly, tension entering his shoulders. Yeah, I've heard the talk too. Does it bother you?" He was quiet for so long that Evelyn thought he might not answer. Then he said carefully, "It bothers me that people can't see a man and woman working together without making it into something improper. But it doesn't bother me enough to stop helping you. Does it bother you?" "It bothers me that I'm causing you trouble, that your reputation might suffer because you chose to be kind." "My reputation's my concern," Luke said firmly. "And honestly, anyone who'd think less of me for helping a neighbor isn't someone whose opinion I value. I made a choice that day at Hanson's Diner. I knew what it might mean, and I did it anyway. No regrets, Evelyn. None at all." They reached the boarding house, and Luke helped her down from the buggy with his usual courtesy. Mrs. Patterson was on the porch, and Evelyn saw the older woman's knowing look as she noted Luke's presence. "Thank you for the escort," Evelyn said. "Any time." Luke tipped his hat. "I'll be out at your place Wednesday afternoon if you're there. Tom Garrett said he'll bring your cattle over Thursday morning. We should walk the property together first, make sure everything's ready." After he left, Mrs. Patterson raised an eyebrow. "That man is getting attached, whether he realizes it yet or not." "We're just friends," Evelyn said automatically. "Famous last words," Mrs. Patterson said with a slight smile. "Come on inside. You've got dust on your face and determination in your eyes. That's a dangerous combination for everyone involved." The next few weeks fell into a rhythm that was both exhausting and exhilarating. Evelyn spent her days at the cabin, working until her body screamed for rest, learning through trial and error and the patient teaching of those willing to help. Luke came by frequently, always with some practical reason, checking fences, delivering supplies, teaching her about water management. Miguel appeared regularly, bringing Elena's cooking and his own quiet wisdom. Even Martha Blackwood stopped by once, inspecting Evelyn's work with critical eyes before giving a grudging nod of approval. The cattle arrived on a Thursday morning, 23 head that looked half wild and wholly intimidating. Tom Garrett, a grizzled man of about 60, helped Luke and Miguel drive them onto Evelyn's property while she watched from a safe distance. "They're yours now," Garrett said, accepting payment with weathered hands. "Your pa took good care of them, and I did the same. Should see some calves come spring. You'll need to think about breeding strategy, culling the weak ones, all that. Luke can help you figure it." Watching the cattle spread across her land, Evelyn felt ownership become real in a way it hadn't before. These were living creatures dependent on her management, her planning, her work. Their survival or failure would reflect directly on her competence. The weight of that responsibility settled over her like a physical thing. "Don't look so worried," Luke said, appearing at her elbow. "They're tougher than they look. All you need to do is make sure they've got water, grass, and secure fencing. The rest they'll handle themselves." "What if something goes wrong? What if I make a mistake that costs them their lives?" "Then you'll learn from it and do better next time. That's all any of us can do." Luke's voice was gentle. "You're going to make mistakes, Evelyn. Everyone does. The trick is not letting fear of mistakes paralyze you into inaction." That night, sleeping at the cabin for the first time, Evelyn lay awake listening to unfamiliar sounds. The cattle moving in the darkness, wind through the cottonwoods, the creak of wood adjusting to temperature changes. Every sound seemed magnified, potentially threatening, and she clutched her father's rifle with sweaty palms until exhaustion finally dragged her under. She woke to dawn light and the immediate panic of responsibility. The cattle needed checking. The fences needed walking. A dozen tasks waited, and she was alone with them. But she got up, made coffee on the stove that was finally working properly, and stepped outside to face the day. The land spread before her in the early light, golden and red and impossibly beautiful. Her cattle grazed peacefully in the meadow. Smoke rose from Luke's place in the distance, a reminder that she wasn't truly alone. And somewhere inside her chest, beneath the fear and exhaustion and uncertainty, something that felt dangerously like hope began to take root. She was doing it. Against all odds, all expectations, all the voices that said she'd fail, she was actually doing it. The autumn days grew shorter, the nights colder. Evelyn worked with increasing urgency, preparing for winter she'd been warned would be brutal. She split wood until her arms ached, following Miguel's demonstration of proper technique. She preserved vegetables from Elena's garden, payment for lessons in cooking that would keep her alive when fresh food disappeared. She repaired every weakness in the cabin's structure, guided by Luke's experienced eye and Martha's unforgiving standards. And then, on an October evening when the aspens had turned gold and the air held the first serious bite of coming cold, everything changed. Evelyn was walking the fence line at dusk, checking for any damage from the cattle, when she smelled smoke. Not cookfire smoke, something bigger, more ominous. She turned toward her hay barn and saw flames. For a moment she simply froze, unable to process what she was seeing. Then instinct kicked in. She ran toward the cabin, grabbed buckets, started hauling water from the creek. But even as she threw the first bucket on the flames, she knew it was hopeless. The fire had too much of a head start, the barn too dry from summer sun. She fired 3 shots in quick succession, the signal Luke had taught her, then returned to fighting the fire with desperate futility. The barn was nearly gone by the time Luke arrived at full gallop, Miguel close behind. They helped her contain it, kept it from spreading to other buildings, but the barn itself was lost. Standing in the darkness afterward, watching embers drift like malevolent fireflies, Evelyn felt something in her chest crack. The barn, the hay she'd worked so hard to put by, the supplies she'd stored there, all gone. Winter was coming, and she'd just lost one of her most critical resources. "This wasn't an accident," Luke said quietly, crouching near the barn's remains. Even in the darkness, Evelyn could see his face was grim. "Look here. This is where it started. Someone set this deliberately." The words hung in the air like smoke. Someone had done this. Deliberately. To her. Martha's warnings echoed in Evelyn's mind. Someone who wanted her to fail, wanted her desperate, wanted her gone. Someone who saw her as a problem to be eliminated. "Who?" she whispered. "I don't know," Luke said, standing. His jaw was tight with anger. "But we're going to find out." The morning after the fire brought a cold rain that turned the barn's remains into a blackened, muddy scar on the landscape. Evelyn stood at her cabin window watching water drip from the eaves, feeling numb in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature. Luke had insisted on staying the night, sleeping on the floor of the main room with his rifle across his chest, and she'd been too shaken to argue about propriety or appearances. He was awake now, making coffee on her stove with the ease of someone comfortable in any kitchen. Miguel had arrived before dawn, equally grim-faced, and the 2 men spoke in low voices while Evelyn tried to calculate the cost of what she'd lost. The hay alone represented weeks of work and money she couldn't easily replace. The barn would need complete rebuilding, and winter was perhaps 6 weeks away. "Miss Evelyn," Miguel said gently, bringing her a cup of coffee, "you need to eat something. You need strength for what comes next." "What has come next?" she asked, her voice sounding strange and distant to her own ears. "How do I fight someone I can't see? Someone who's willing to destroy my property in the dark?" "First, we make sure you're safe," Luke said, joining them at the window. His eyes were shadowed with lack of sleep, but his voice was steady. "Then we figure out who did this and why, and then we make damn sure they can't do it again." The rain intensified, drumming on the roof with increasing force. Luke studied the sky with a rancher's practiced eye. "This'll last most of the day. Good for putting out any remaining embers, bad for investigating the scene. Miguel, can you stay here with Evelyn while I ride into town? I want to talk to Judge Morrison, get the law involved officially." "The law?" Evelyn said. "You think the sheriff will care about a barn fire on a woman's property?" "I think arson is a crime, whether the victim's a man or a woman," Luke said firmly. "And Morrison's a fair man. He'll take this seriously, especially after you made your case at the town meeting. You're not invisible anymore, Evelyn. People know you, know you're trying to make a legitimate go of it. That means this attack won't be easy to dismiss or ignore." After Luke left, Miguel settled into a chair by the door, his rifle across his lap, his presence both comforting and unsettling. The fact that he felt the need to stand guard drove home how much danger she might be in. This wasn't just about lost property anymore. This was about someone who wanted her gone badly enough to break the law. "You scared?" Miguel asked quietly. Evelyn considered lying, then decided he deserved honesty. "Terrified, but also angry. Someone came onto my land, destroyed my property, tried to ruin me. And for what? Because I'm a woman who refuses to behave the way they think I should?" "Maybe," Miguel said. "Or maybe because you have something they want. Land, water rights, location, These things worth a lot. Some men, they see opportunity and they don't care who they hurt to take it. Martha warned me, Evelyn said. She told me someone might try something like this. I thought I was being careful. I thought... She stopped, fighting back tears that felt like weakness. I thought if I worked hard enough, proved myself enough, they'd leave me alone. Hard work don't stop evil people from doing evil things, Miguel said simply. All you can do is prepare best you can and fight when you must fight. You know how to shoot now, yes? Martha teach you? She taught me. Evelyn thought of those afternoon hours at Martha's range, the weight of the rifle, the responsibility of knowing how to take a life if necessary. I'm not sure I could actually pull the trigger if it came to it. You could, Miguel said with quiet certainty. When the moment comes, when it's your life or theirs, you could. I hope you never have to find out. But the strength is there. I see it. Mr. Luke sees it. Everyone who knows you sees it. They spent the morning in tense waiting, the rain providing a monotonous soundtrack to Evelyn's spiraling thoughts. She tried to keep busy, organizing supplies, mending a torn shirt, anything to keep her hands occupied. But her mind kept returning to the fire, the orange flames against the darkness, the smell of burning hay and wood and hope. Around noon, they heard multiple horses approaching. Evelyn's hand went to the rifle she'd kept close, but Miguel had already moved to the window. It's okay, he said. Is Mr. Luke the judge? And Sheriff Dawson? The three men came in wet and serious, tracking mud that Evelyn would normally have cared about, but couldn't summon the energy to address. Judge Morrison was the first to speak, his kind face lined with concern. Miss Hart, I'm deeply sorry about what's happened. This kind of criminal behavior has no place in our community. He removed his hat, water dripping from its brim. Sheriff Dawson and I would like to examine the scene, ask you some questions if you're up to it. Sheriff Dawson was a lean man in his 50s with skeptical eyes and a weathered face that suggested he'd seen most of what humanity had to offer and hadn't been impressed. Ma'am, he said with a curt nod. Barrett here says you think this was deliberate arson. That's a serious accusation. I'll need to see evidence before I can pursue it as such. The evidence is in what's left of the barn, Luke said, his voice tight with controlled anger. Anyone with eyes can see it started in a way that wasn't natural. They went outside despite the rain, Evelyn wrapped in a coat that did little against the cold and wet. The barn's remains looked even worse in daylight. A skeleton of blackened beams and collapsed walls, everything she'd stored there reduced to ash and charred debris. The sheriff walked the perimeter slowly, occasionally crouching to examine something more closely, his expression giving nothing away. Tell me about last evening, he said finally, turning to Evelyn. What time did you first notice the fire? Just before sunset? Maybe 6 o'clock? I was walking the fence line on the north side and I smelled smoke. When I looked back, the barn was already burning. You see anyone? Hear anything unusual earlier in the day? Evelyn tried to remember, but the previous day felt like it had happened months ago. No, I was working near the cabin most of the afternoon. The barn's far enough away that someone could have approached it without me seeing them, especially if I was focused on my work. Any enemies? Dawson asked bluntly. Anyone who's threatened you, made their dislike known, suggested you should leave? Half the town made their dislike known when I first arrived, Evelyn said. Gordon Hansen refused me service at his diner. There were men at the saloon who made crude comments. And at the town meeting, Hansen questioned my right to be here, my ability to manage the property. But threatening me? No one's been that direct. Hansen, the sheriff repeated thoughtfully. He strikes me as the type who talks big but acts small. Still, I'll have a conversation with him. Anyone else? Luke cleared his throat. A few weeks back, there was a man nosing around asking about this property. Name of Curtis, said he was a land agent from Santa Fe. He approached me asking if I knew whether Miss Hart might be interested in selling. I told him she'd just arrived and had no intention of selling. He seemed frustrated by that answer. Curtis, Dawson wrote the name in a small notebook he'd produced from his coat. I'll look into him. What else? They spent another hour going over details, with the sheriff examining the burn pattern and eventually confirming what Luke had said. The fire had started in a corner of the barn, far from where any natural ignition source would have been. Someone had deliberately set it, probably using kerosene or lamp oil to make sure it caught quickly and burned hot. "This is arson," Dawson said finally, his tone making clear he didn't take the crime lightly. "Question is who and why. Could be someone trying to drive you off your land. Could be someone who doesn't like the idea of a woman rancher. Could be personal grudge we don't know about yet. I'll investigate, but I'll be honest with you, Miss Hart. Without witnesses or direct evidence pointing to a specific person, these cases are hard to solve. So whoever did this might get away with it." Evelyn's voice was flat. "Not if I can help it," Dawson said, "but you need to be realistic about the challenges. Meantime, you need to take precautions. Don't stay out here alone until we know what we're dealing with. Keep your rifle close. And if anything else happens, anything suspicious at all, you send for me immediately." After the sheriff and judge left, Luke lingered, his expression troubled. "You can't stay here tonight. It's not safe." "This is my home," Evelyn said stubbornly. "I won't be driven away from it." "I'm not suggesting you give up. I'm suggesting you use common sense. Someone burned your barn, Evelyn. Someone who knew you were here alone, knew exactly where to strike to cause maximum damage. You think they're done? You think they won't try something else if given the opportunity? So what do you suggest? I move back to Mrs. Patterson's and abandon everything I've worked for?" "I suggest you stay at Mrs. Patterson's during the week when you're working in town or getting supplies," Luke said patiently. "And on nights you need to be here, someone stays with you. Me, Miguel, even Martha if she's willing. We rotate, make sure you're not alone until this is resolved." "That's not sustainable," Evelyn protested. "Everyone has their own work, their own responsibilities. I can't ask people to reorganize their lives around protecting me." Miguel spoke up from where he'd been quietly listening. "Miss Evelyn, you not asking, we offering. Mr. Luke is right, this is not safe, and we—" He paused, searching for words. "We not let bad things happen to good people when we can prevent. This is what neighbors do." Evelyn felt tears threaten again, this time from gratitude rather than fear. "I don't know how I'll ever repay all of you." "You'll survive," Luke said simply. "You'll rebuild. You'll prove that whoever did this didn't break you. That'll be payment enough." The next days fell into a new rhythm shaped by caution and community response. Word of the fire spread through Redemption Springs faster than the flames had spread through the barn, and the reaction was more supportive than Evelyn had dared hope. Elena showed up with her sister and several other women from the Mexican community, bringing food and supplies and offers of help. Martha Blackwood arrived with lumber she happened to have extra of, and a work crew from her ranch. Even Tom Garrett stopped by with a load of hay he could spare until you get back on your feet. The support wasn't universal. Evelyn heard through Mrs. Patterson that Gordon Hansen had been heard saying the fire was probably Evelyn's own fault, result of a woman's carelessness with fire. And there were others who seemed to take satisfaction in her misfortune, seeing it as proof she'd been foolish to try ranching alone. But the voices of support outnumbered the critics, and within a week, the skeleton of a new barn had begun to rise from the ashes of the old. Luke coordinated the work with the efficiency of someone who'd organized community building projects before. Miguel and James did most of the actual construction, teaching Evelyn as they worked. Martha showed up most afternoons, ostensibly to supervise, but really, Evelyn suspected, to make sure no one took advantage of the situation to cut corners or overcharge. Sheriff Dawson stopped by 3 times over those 2 weeks, asking more questions, following leads that apparently went nowhere. He'd talked to Curtis, the land agent, who had an alibi for the night of the fire. He'd questioned Hansen, who'd been at his diner all evening with multiple witnesses. He'd looked into several other possibilities, but none had panned out. Whoever did this was smart about it, he told Evelyn and Luke during his 3rd visit. They picked a time when you were alone, approached from a direction with no clear sightlines, and left nothing behind that points definitively to anyone specific. Unless someone talks or makes another attempt, we may never know who's responsible. So they just get away with it, Evelyn said bitterly. For now, maybe. But criminals make mistakes eventually. They get cocky or careless, or they talk to the wrong person. Dawson's expression was sympathetic but realistic. I'm not giving up, Miss Hart, but I want you to understand what you're up against. The first snow came in early November, just a dusting that melted by noon but served as warning of what was coming. Evelyn's new barn was finished just in time, smaller than the original but sound and weatherproof. Her wood was stacked, her supplies laid in, her cabin as winter-ready as she could make it. Luke had taught her to read weather signs, Miguel had shown her how to care for cattle in cold conditions, and Martha had drilled her on winter survival until Evelyn could recite protocols in her sleep. She was as prepared as someone could be facing their first high plains winter. But the shadow of the fire hung over everything, an invisible threat that made every unexpected sound, every approaching rider, every moment alone feel potentially dangerous. Luke had kept his word about not letting her stay alone. He and Miguel rotated nights at the cabin, one or the other always there after dark. It was practical, necessary even, but Evelyn was acutely aware of how it looked to the town. The gossip that had been manageable before the fire now took on sharper edges. People whispered about propriety, about what might be happening between the rancher and the woman he was protecting, about whether Luke Barrett was being noble or simply taking advantage of a vulnerable situation. Mrs. Patterson, ever direct, brought it up over breakfast one morning in mid-November. "You know what people are saying, don't you?" "I can imagine," Evelyn said tiredly. "They're saying Luke's courting you, that the fire was convenient because it gave him an excuse to be at your property every night. Some are even suggesting you two planned it together to force a situation where you'd have to marry to preserve your reputation." Evelyn set down her coffee cup with more force than intended. "That's insane. Luke has been nothing but honorable. He's helping me the way any decent neighbor would help someone in trouble." "I know that, you know that, but people see what they want to see, and right now they want to see a romance because it makes better gossip than simple human decency." Mrs. Patterson leaned forward. "I'm not saying you need to stop accepting his help. I'm saying you need to be aware of where this is heading. Eventually people are going to expect something to come of it, and if nothing does, they'll make you both pay for defying their expectations." "What are you suggesting?" Evelyn asked. "I'm suggesting you and Luke need to have an honest conversation about what you are to each other and what you want to be. Because this limbo you're in, friends who look like more than friends, neighbors whose relationship goes beyond neighboring, it can't last. Not in a town like this." That evening, Luke arrived at the cabin for his turn staying overnight. Evelyn had been dreading this conversation, but Mrs. Patterson's words had made clear it couldn't be avoided any longer. "Luke, we need to talk," she said after they'd finished the simple dinner she'd prepared. Something in her tone made him set down his coffee and give her his full attention. "That sounds ominous." "It's about us, about what people are saying about us." "I've heard some of it," he admitted. "Does it bother you?" "It bothers me that you're being subjected to gossip because you chose to help me. It bothers me that people can't accept that a man and woman can simply be friends. And it bothers me that Mrs. Patterson thinks eventually the gossip will force us into a situation neither of us chose." Luke was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee as if it held answers. "What do you want, Evelyn? Not what the town wants, not what's proper or expected. What do you actually want?" The question caught her off guard. What did she want? She'd been so focused on survival, on proving herself, on not failing, that she hadn't let herself think about personal desires beyond basic security and success. "I want to keep my land," she said slowly. "I want to prove I can do this, that my father was right to believe in me. I want to build something that lasts, something that's entirely mine. And I want—" She paused, searching for honesty. "I want friends I can trust. I want to belong somewhere. I want to not feel like I'm constantly on trial." "And me?" Luke asked quietly. "Where do I fit in that picture?" Evelyn met his eyes, those kind, steady eyes that had first offered her help in front of Hanson's diner. "You're the first real friend I've made here. Maybe the first real friend I've had in years. In Boston, everything was so formal, so proper. People were colleagues or acquaintances or potential suitors, but rarely just friends. You've never treated me like I was less than capable because I'm a woman. You've never made me feel like accepting help meant accepting control. You've just been there, honest and steady and kind." "That sounds like a friend," Luke said. "It does," Evelyn agreed, "but the town doesn't want us to be friends. The town wants a story that makes sense in their understanding of how the world works. Man helps woman, man courts woman, man marries woman. That's the acceptable narrative." "Yes," Evelyn said. Luke stood and walked to the window, looking out at the darkness. The first serious snow was falling, fat flakes that caught the lamplight as they drifted past. "I need to be honest with you about something," he said finally, his back still to her. "When I first saw you standing outside that diner, I helped because it was the right thing to do. That's true, but somewhere over these past months, my feelings have gotten more complicated." Evelyn's heart began to pound. Complicated how? He turned to face her, and in his expression she saw something she'd been deliberately not seeing: attraction, affection, the quiet hope of someone who wanted more but was afraid to ask for it. "I care about you, Evelyn. As a friend, yes, but also as more than that. I admire your courage, your intelligence, your stubborn refusal to quit when everything's stacked against you. I look forward to the days when I know I'll see you. I worry about you when we're apart. And sometimes when we're working together or just talking, I find myself thinking about what it would be like if the town gossips were right. If we were courting. If you might someday feel for me what I'm starting to feel for you." The confession hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable and terrifying. Evelyn opened her mouth to respond, but found she didn't know what to say. Her feelings for Luke were complex too. Gratitude and friendship and trust, yes, but underneath that, something warmer that she'd been afraid to examine too closely. "You don't have to answer now," Luke said quickly. "I'm not trying to pressure you or force a situation. I just thought you deserved to know the truth, especially if we're going to figure out how to handle the gossip together. But nothing has to change. If you only see me as a friend, I can live with that. Your friendship means too much to lose over wanting more." "Luke," Evelyn said softly, finding her voice, "I don't know what I feel. Everything's been so chaotic, so focused on survival, that I haven't let myself think about personal feelings. You're important to me, incredibly important, but I came here to be independent, to prove I could stand on my own. The idea of romantic entanglement, of potentially having to choose between my autonomy and a relationship, that terrifies me." "I know," he said. "And I'm not asking you to choose. I would never ask you to give up your independence or your dreams. If we were together, and that's a big if, that's entirely up to you, I'd want you as a partner, not a dependent, someone who stands beside me, not behind me." "Is that even possible?" Evelyn asked. "In this time, this place? Women who marry lose legal control of their property. Their husbands make all the decisions, hold all the power. How could we be partners when the law itself says we can't be equals?" "I don't know," Luke admitted, "but I know my grandfather and grandmother managed it somehow. She had opinions, and he listened to them. They made decisions together. She ran parts of the business he never touched, and he respected her expertise. It wasn't perfect. The law still gave him ultimate authority, but in practice, in their daily life, they were partners. I always admired that. Always wanted something like it if I ever married." Snow continued to fall outside, accumulating now, beginning to blanket the world in white. Evelyn watched it and thought about what Luke was offering. Not just romance, but partnership. Not just help, but genuine equality within an unequal system. It was more than Charles Whitmore had ever offered with his talk of managing her property and making proper decisions. More than most men would offer any woman. But it was also a risk. Opening her heart meant making herself vulnerable in ways that had nothing to do with barn fires and arson. It meant trusting not just Luke's current intentions, but his future actions. It meant believing that love and independence could coexist when most evidence suggested they couldn't. "I need time," she said finally. "Time to think, to figure out what I want beyond survival. Can you give me that? Can we just continue as we are for now, while I sort through my feelings?" "Take all the time you need," Luke said. "Like I said, your friendship alone is worth more than most men get in a lifetime. Everything else is just possibility, not expectation." They spent the rest of the evening in careful conversation about neutral topics: the cattle, the coming winter, plans for spring planting. But something had shifted between them, acknowledged if not yet resolved. The possibility Luke had named hung in the air like the snow falling outside, beautiful and slightly frightening and impossible to ignore. That night, with Luke sleeping by the fire as he had so many nights before, Evelyn lay awake thinking about choices and consequences. She thought about her father's letters urging her to be brave, about Martha's warnings to trust her instincts, About Elena's advice that women must help each other survive in a man's world. She thought about Charles Whitmore's safe, suffocating proposal and Luke Barrett's risky, honest confession. Most of all, she thought about what she wanted her life to look like. Not the life society expected, not the life that would be easiest, but the life that would make her feel most fully herself. And somewhere in the dark hours before dawn, she began to understand that independence didn't have to mean isolation, that accepting help wasn't the same as accepting control, that maybe, just maybe, she could have both the land she'd claimed and the connection she was beginning to realize she wanted. The snow continued through the night, and when morning came, the world was transformed. Everything was white and clean and new, as if the fire and its shadows had been buried under fresh possibility. Evelyn woke to find Luke already up, making coffee, looking out at the changed landscape with an expression of quiet contentment. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said when he noticed she was awake. "Yes," she agreed, joining him at the window. "Beautiful and terrifying. So much of life seems to be both at once." Luke glanced at her, understanding in his eyes. "That's probably the truest thing anyone's ever said." They stood there together in comfortable silence, watching the snow fall, and Evelyn thought that this exact moment of shared peace and possibility, might be what happiness felt like. Not the absence of fear or challenge, but the presence of someone who made both feel bearable. Someone who pulled up a chair beside you when the world said you should stand alone, and who kept sitting there even when standing alone might have been easier. The fire had taken her barn, but it had also revealed who her true allies were. It had cost her supplies and safety, but it had also shown her the strength of community and the depth of one man's steady devotion. And now, with winter settling in and choices looming ahead, Evelyn realized that sometimes the things that seem like disasters are really just the universe's harsh way of showing you what actually matters. What mattered was standing beside her, drinking coffee and watching snow fall, patient as stone and twice as solid. Winter settled over the territory with the weight of inevitability. The snow that had begun as a gentle introduction became a relentless presence, transforming the landscape into something both beautiful and unforgiving. Evelyn learned to read the sky for coming storms, to judge wind direction and temperature with the accuracy of someone whose survival depended on such knowledge. The cattle huddled together in the lee of the barn, and she checked them twice daily, breaking ice on their water, ensuring they had access to the hay she'd worked so desperately to preserve. Luke continued his nighttime vigils, though as weeks passed with no further incidents, they both began to wonder if the arsonist had been satisfied with the single attack, or had been frightened off by the sheriff's investigation. Still, neither of them suggested ending the arrangement. The nights were long and cold, and there was comfort in not facing them alone. It was during one of those long evenings in late November, with wind howling around the cabin and snow piling against the walls, that Luke taught Evelyn to play chess using a set his grandfather had carved from wood. They sat by the fire, the board between them, and he explained strategy with the same patient thoroughness he brought to teaching her about fences and cattle. "You're thinking too much about individual pieces," he said after she'd lost her third game. "Chess isn't about protecting every pawn. It's about seeing the whole board, understanding what you're willing to sacrifice to achieve your larger goal." "Sounds like life," Evelyn said, moving her knight into what she suspected was another trap. "Most worthwhile things do." Luke captured her knight as predicted, but his expression was thoughtful rather than triumphant. "You've been quiet lately. More than usual, I mean. Something on your mind besides the obvious?" Evelyn had been thinking, in fact, about everything Mrs. Patterson had said, about Luke's confession, about the future she was trying to build and what shape she wanted it to take. The isolation of winter had given her time to examine her feelings without the distraction of constant work and community scrutiny. "I've been thinking about what you said," she admitted, "about your feelings, about us." Luke's hand stilled over the chessboard. And I realize I've been afraid for the wrong reasons. I came here to be independent, and I've been so focused on proving I don't need anyone that I've been afraid to admit I might want someone. But wanting and needing aren't the same thing, are they?" "No," Luke said quietly. "They're not. You can be perfectly capable of standing alone and still choose not to. That's not weakness, that's being human. Evelyn moved her queen, a bold play that either would turn the game or lose it entirely. I care about you, Luke, more than I've wanted to admit. You've become necessary to me in ways that have nothing to do with running this ranch. When something happens, good or bad, you're the person I want to tell. When I'm working alone, I find myself thinking about things you've said, seeing the landscape through observations you've made. You've become part of how I understand this place. That sounds like more than friendship, Luke said, his voice careful, hopeful. It is more than friendship, Evelyn confirmed, but I'm still afraid. Afraid of losing myself. Afraid of becoming someone's property instead of my own person. Afraid that what feels like partnership now might become something else after marriage gives you legal control over everything I've built. Luke reached across the chessboard and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. I can't promise you there won't be challenges. Law being what it is, you're right that marriage would technically give me authority over your property. But I can promise you that I would never use that authority against you. I can promise that every major decision would be ours together, not mine alone. And I can promise that I'd rather have you as an equal partner than as an obedient wife. How can you be sure? Evelyn asked. How can either of us be sure that good intentions won't shift into something else over time? We can't be sure, Luke said honestly. That's the risk of trusting anyone with your heart. But here's what I know. I've watched my parents work their ranch together for 30 years. I've seen my father defer to my mother's judgment on things she knows better than him. I've seen her trust his expertise in areas where he's stronger. They've fought, sure, sometimes loud enough that the hired hands heard every word, but they've never stopped being partners. That's what I want. That's the only kind of marriage I'm interested in. Your parents are still alive? Evelyn realized she'd never asked about Luke's family, too caught up in her own struggles. Back in Texas, running the ranch I grew up on. They're getting older now, thinking about whether one of my brothers might take it over. I came out here because I wanted to build something of my own rather than waiting for an inheritance. He smiled slightly. Guess we have that in common, wanting to prove ourselves independent of family expectations. The wind rattled the windows, a reminder of the harsh world beyond their small circle of firelight. Evelyn thought about her father's letters, about his belief that she was strong enough to claim this land and make it hers. But maybe strength wasn't just about standing alone. Maybe it was also about knowing when to reach for the hand being offered. I need more time, she said finally. Not because I don't care about you, I do. More than I expected to care about anyone. But because this decision is too important to rush. Spring will come eventually. Let's see where we are when the snow melts, when the immediate crisis has passed and we can think clearly about the future. Spring it is, Luke agreed, though for the record I've never thought more clearly than I do when I'm with you. They finished their chess game. Evelyn's bold queen move actually worked, earning her first victory, and settled into their usual evening routine of reading by firelight before sleep. But something had shifted again, become clearer. They were no longer pretending that what existed between them was simple friendship. They were acknowledging possibility, giving it space to grow or fade as winter gave way to spring. December brought bitter cold and a crisis that tested everything Evelyn had learned. 3 of her cattle went missing during a blizzard, and when the storm finally cleared enough to search, she and Luke found them trapped in a ravine 2 miles from the property. One was already dead, frozen, and beyond help. The other 2 were in bad shape, weak and injured from their fall. Luke assessed the situation with grim efficiency. We need to get them out now or they'll die too. But it's going to take both of us, and it's going to be dangerous. That ravine wall is unstable, and if it gives way while we're down there, then we'll deal with it, Evelyn said, already working out how to rig a rope system. Those cattle are my responsibility. I'm not leaving them to die because it's risky. They spent hours in the freezing cold working in tandem to create a pulley system that could haul the cattle up the ravine wall. It required every bit of strength Evelyn possessed, and several moments when she was certain they were both going to end up injured or worse. But Luke's steady presence, his clear instructions and unwavering confidence in her ability to handle her end of the work, kept her focused. When they finally got both cattle back to the barn, exhausted and half-frozen themselves, Luke pulled her into a rough hug that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with shared survival. You were incredible, he said into her hair. Most seasoned ranchers would have given up or called for more help. You just dug in and got it done. We got it done, Evelyn corrected, but she didn't pull away from his warmth. I couldn't have managed it alone. That's my point, Luke said. You're strong enough to handle this life, but you're also smart enough to know when partnership makes the impossible possible. That's rarer than you think. The rescued cattle survived, though it took weeks of careful nursing. The incident became another story that spread through Redemption Springs, and Evelyn noticed a shift in how some people looked at her. The skepticism hadn't vanished entirely, but it had been tempered by grudging respect. She'd made it through half a winter. She'd rebuilt after disaster. She'd saved her livestock against hard odds. Slowly, incrementally, she was proving that she belonged. Christmas came quiet and strange, so different from Boston celebrations that Evelyn felt homesick for the first time since arriving. But Elena insisted on including her in the Ramirez family celebration, and Martha showed up with a practical gift, a new pair of work gloves that fit perfectly. Luke gave her a book of poetry his mother had sent from Texas, with an inscription inside that read, "For Evelyn, who is writing her own poetry in fence posts and stubborn courage." She'd given him a hand-tooled leather bookmark she'd worked on in secret during evening hours, carved with a pattern of cottonwood leaves. It was a small thing, but his expression when he opened it told her he understood what it meant. Acknowledgement of the reading they did together, the quiet evenings that had become as important as the dramatic rescues. "Thank you," he said softly. "I'll treasure this." New Year arrived with the coldest temperatures yet, and for 3 days Evelyn didn't leave the cabin except to tend the animals. Luke was snowed in at his own ranch, unable to make the crossing, and for the first time in months she faced the isolation she'd initially sought. It was terrifying and liberating in equal measure, proof that she could survive alone, but also confirmation that she preferred not to. When the weather finally broke enough for travel, Luke appeared at her door looking haggard, his face drawn with worry that relaxed only when he saw she was safe. "I was going crazy," he admitted. "Knowing you were here alone, not able to check on you, imagining all the things that could go wrong." "I survived," Evelyn said, pulling him inside where it was warm. "I was fine. Lonely, maybe, but fine." "Lonely," Luke repeated, as if the word held significance. "That's interesting. A few months ago, I don't think you'd have admitted to loneliness. You'd have called it peace or independence or exactly what you wanted." He was right, and Evelyn realized with sudden clarity that something fundamental had changed. She no longer saw solitude as success or connection as failure. She'd proven she could stand alone. Now she was free to choose whether she wanted to. January brought a thaw, and with it, Sheriff Dawson with news. He arrived at the cabin on a gray afternoon when Evelyn was working on repairing tack, finding Luke there as well, helping to reorganize the barn's interior for maximum efficiency. "I've got information about your fire," Dawson said without preamble. "Took some time, but I finally got someone to talk. You remember that land agent, Curtis? The one who was asking about buying my property?" Evelyn set down the bridle she'd been oiling. "Same one. Turns out he wasn't just a land agent, he was working for someone specific, a rancher named Thornton from over near Albuquerque. Thornton's been buying up properties in this area, trying to consolidate a large holding. Your land sits right in the middle of what he wants to control, especially because of the water rights." "So he hired someone to burn my barn?" Evelyn's voice was hard. "To terrorize me into selling?" "Not exactly. Curtis got overzealous trying to impress his employer. Thought if he could push you into a desperate situation, you'd sell cheap and he'd look good for acquiring the property. Thornton claims he never authorized anything illegal, and I'm inclined to believe him. He's got too much to lose to risk arson charges. But Curtis crossed a line." "Where's Curtis now?" Luke asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "In jail in Santa Fe, charged with arson and criminal intimidation. He'll face trial in the spring. Thornton's lawyer is trying to distance his client from the whole thing, and without proof that Thornton ordered the fire, we can't charge him. But Curtis will go to prison, and Thornton knows I'm watching. He won't risk trying anything else." Evelyn sat down slowly, processing this information. It hadn't been personal hatred or prejudice that burned her barn. It had been simple greed. Somehow that was both better and worse. Better because it meant the town's resistance to her presence wasn't violent. Worse because it meant her land would always be valuable enough to invite predatory attention. What happens if Thornton tries to buy her out legally? Luke asked. Makes a legitimate offer? Then that's Miss Hart's decision, Dawson said. Nothing illegal about making an offer, even if the timing's suspicious. But I'd suggest you think hard before selling to anyone connected to Thornton, Miss Hart. Men like that don't like losing, and they've got long memories. After the sheriff left, Evelyn and Luke sat in silence for a long time. Finally, Luke said, "You know what this means, don't you? You've got something valuable enough that people are willing to commit crimes to take it from you. That's not going to go away." "I know," Evelyn said, "but I'm not selling. This land is mine. My father chose it, worked it, died believing I'd claim it. I won't let greed or intimidation or any amount of money take it from me. Even if staying means permanent danger, even if Thornton or someone like him tries again." Even then, Evelyn met his eyes. "You asked me once what I wanted. I want this. All of it. The work, the risk, the beauty, the hardship. I want to prove that a woman can hold land and make it prosper. I want to build something that lasts. And yes, I want—" She paused, gathering courage. "I want someone to build it with me, if that someone is still interested." Luke's expression shifted through surprise to hope to certainty. That someone has never been more interested in anything in his entire life. Even knowing it means partnering with a woman stubborn enough to stay on land that criminals want, even knowing I'll never be obedient or traditional or anything resembling a conventional wife. Especially knowing that, Luke said. "Evelyn, I don't want conventional. I want you, stubborn, brilliant, brave, impossible you. I want to wake up every morning knowing we're building something together. I want to fight through hard winters and celebrate good harvests and make decisions as partners. I want to be the person you tell things to, and I want you to be that person for me. If that means dealing with men like Thornton, if that means weathering gossip and scandal and whatever else the world throws at us, I'm willing. More than willing, honored." Evelyn felt tears on her cheeks and didn't bother to wipe them away. "When the snow melts," she said, "when spring comes and we can think clearly without winter pressing down on us, ask me then, and I'll give you an answer." "When spring comes," Luke agreed, pulling her into an embrace that felt like coming home. "I can wait for spring." February was the longest month Evelyn had ever experienced, despite being the shortest on the calendar. The cold persisted, bitter and relentless, testing her preparations and her resolve. She lost 2 more cattle to winter kill despite her best efforts, and the grief of those losses was sharp and personal. Each animal represented not just economic value, but proof of her competence or lack thereof. But she also saw the first signs of success. The cattle that survived were healthy, well-fed, growing sleek on the hay she'd preserved. Her cabin was warm and well-stocked. The new barn stood solid against every storm. And when Martha Blackwood stopped by for an inspection in late February, the older woman's verdict was simple and profound. "You'll make it. You've got what it takes." March arrived with mud and melting snow and the first brave hints of green in sheltered places. Evelyn's cattle made it through to spring with acceptable losses, and Tom Garrett stopped by to tell her that her success rate was better than many experienced ranchers had managed that winter. She'd proven herself not just capable, but competent, and the change in how people treated her was noticeable. Gordon Hanson actually nodded to her in town. The women who'd crossed the street to avoid her now stopped to chat. And at the general store, the owner who'd been cold and dismissive on her first visits now asked her opinion on feed prices and took her answers seriously. "You've become part of the landscape," Elena said one afternoon when they were working together to prepare Evelyn's garden plot for spring planting. "People forget you're supposed to be different. You're just Evelyn now, the rancher who lives by Cottonwood Creek. That's success, I think." On a warm April afternoon when the cottonwoods were budding and the meadow grass was beginning to grow thick and green, Luke rode over to find Evelyn mending fence. She'd learned to handle the work herself now, and he watched her for a moment before announcing his presence, admiring the confidence in her movements, the way she belonged to this landscape as if she'd always been here. "Evelyn Hart," he said, and something in his tone made her turn around with her heart already racing. "Spring is here. Snow's melted. Winter's passed. Time for clear thinking." "Time for clear thinking," she agreed, setting down her tools and walking to meet him. Luke dismounted and pulled something from his saddlebag, a small box carved from wood. The craftsmanship beautiful and clearly handmade. My grandfather made this for my grandmother when he proposed to her. It's been passed down, waiting for the right moment, the right person. And now I'm hoping that person is you. He opened the box to reveal a simple gold ring with a small stone that caught the sunlight. It wasn't fancy or expensive, but it was genuine and chosen with care, and it represented everything Luke had promised: partnership over possession, equality within an unequal system, love that respected rather than constrained. Evelyn Hart, will you marry me? Will you be my partner in this life we're building? Will you let me stand beside you for all the seasons to come, the hard ones and the good ones and everything in between? Evelyn looked at the ring, at Luke's hopeful face, at the land spreading around them green and full of promise. She thought about the woman who'd arrived here last summer, desperate and determined and alone. She thought about everything she'd learned, everyone who'd helped her, all the ways she'd grown stronger and more certain of who she was and what she wanted. Yes, she said, smiling through tears. Yes to all of it. Yes to partnership and seasons and standing beside you. Yes to building something together that's bigger than either of us alone. Luke Barrett, I will absolutely marry you. He slipped the ring on her finger and it fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting all this time to find its proper home. Then he kissed her, gentle and thorough and full of promise, while the April wind blew warm around them and the cattle grazed peacefully in the distance. They were married in June at the small church in Redemption Springs, with Judge Morrison performing the ceremony and half the town in attendance. Elena and her sister helped Evelyn make a dress from fabric Martha had gifted, simple but beautiful, suitable for a woman who'd be working a ranch the next day. Miguel stood up with Luke, and Martha stood with Evelyn, the two older ranchers serving as witnesses to this unusual union. Gordon Hanson didn't attend, but his wife did, and she brought a wedding gift with a note that read, "My husband's opinions are his own. I judge by character, not gender. Congratulations." The reception was held at Luke's ranch, their ranch now, though they decided to maintain both properties, living between them as work required. Elena had organized the food, and the celebration lasted until sunset, full of music and dancing and the kind of community warmth that made Redemption Springs feel like home. As evening fell and guests began departing, Evelyn stood with Luke watching the sun paint the mountains purple and gold. "Your grandfather was right," she said quietly. "Kindness doesn't cost anything, but the lack of it can cost everything. You showed me kindness that first day, and it changed my entire life." "I pulled up a chair beside you," Luke said, his arm around her waist. "That's all. The rest was you, your courage, your work, your refusal to quit. I was just smart enough not to stand in your way." "You were smart enough to stand with me," Evelyn corrected. "There's a difference." They stood there together as twilight deepened, two partners who'd found each other through circumstance and choice, ready to face whatever came next. The land stretched around them, their land, marked by fence posts they'd set together, and dreams they'd built from nothing. It wouldn't always be easy, they both knew that. There would be hard winters and difficult seasons and challenges they couldn't yet imagine, but they'd face them together, side by side, equal partners in the life they were creating. And that, Evelyn thought, was worth more than any amount of conventional safety or social approval. That was worth everything. Years later, when their daughter asked about how her parents met, Evelyn would tell her about standing alone outside a diner in the hot sun, refused and humiliated and ready to give up. And then she'd tell her about the cowboy who dismounted his horse, walked straight to her side, and did something that seemed simple but changed everything. He pulled up a chair beside her and told the world she deserved a place at the table. Sometimes, Evelyn would tell her daughter, courage is dramatic and obvious. But sometimes it's just someone choosing to sit beside you when everyone else expects you to stand alone. That's when you know you've found someone worth keeping. Luke's voice would call from the porch, interrupting the story as it always did. "Supper's ready, Mrs. Barrett." And Evelyn would smile, knowing that love had indeed begun with one simple act of courage, a chair pulled up beside a woman who needed an ally, and a man decent enough to see another human being rather than a problem or an opportunity. In the harsh beauty of the New Mexico territory, where the land itself taught hard lessons about survival and community, They'd built something that lasted. Not just a ranch or a marriage, but a partnership that proved love and independence could coexist. That strength wasn't about standing alone, but about knowing when to reach for the hand being offered. The sun would set over the mountains, painting everything gold, and the Hart Barrett Ranch would settle into evening peace. Inside, a family would gather for supper, partners who'd built a life together, children who'd inherit not just land, but the legacy of courage and kindness their parents had demonstrated. And somewhere in the gathering darkness, if you listened carefully, you could almost hear the echo of that first moment when Luke Barrett had said, "Miss Hart will eat with me," and changed the course of two lives forever. That's how love stories begin in the American West. Not with grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but with simple human decency extended when it's needed most. With a chair pulled up beside someone standing alone. With the quiet courage of choosing partnership over prejudice, hope over fear, and possibility over the safe certainty of staying exactly as you are. And if you're lucky, very lucky, that simple beginning grows into something extraordinary. Something worth fighting for, worth building on, worth passing down to future generations as proof that sometimes the best things in life start with the smallest acts of kindness. Luke pulled up a chair beside Evelyn that hot summer day, and in doing so, he opened the door to a future neither of them could have imagined, but both were brave enough to build together. That's the story. That's the truth. That's what happens when someone chooses to stand beside you instead of standing in your way. And that's why, even decades later, Evelyn would look at Luke across a dinner table or working side by side in the barn and feel grateful all over again for the cowboy who saw her not as a problem to solve or a woman to save, but as a person deserving of basic human dignity and the space to prove herself. He pulled up a chair beside her, and everything else followed from that one act of courage.